They dragged the woman across the square while the crowd cheered like it was a holiday. Her wrists were bound, her gray shift was torn at the shoulder, and her dark hair hung in her face. And still she tried to speak, and still they drowned her out. Accursed necromancer. She brought this on herself. The words came from 1,000 throats at once, and each throat was smiling. She was beautiful, or she had been, before the weeks in a cell took the color out of her. Her eyes were a strange deep violet, and they moved over the mob searching for one face that was not glad, and they found none. She stopped fighting the guards. She turned toward the raised platform where the powerful stood, and she pleaded, not for mercy now, just to be heard. I only warned her, she said. Her voice cracked and carried anyway. I never sent the dead against anyone. I gave a warning, that was all. No one would listen. No one ever listened. No one listened then either. High above them, unseen, a second woman watched, and she was not standing anywhere at all. Maya drifted above the square like smoke, and no one could see her because she was not really there. She did not know how she had come to be here. One moment there had been the long gray nothing after her own life ended, and the next there was this, a stone city under a hard sun, a crowd, a scaffold, and her hanging over all of it, weightless, unable to touch a single thing. She reached for the wall beside her, and her hand passed through it. Then she looked down, and the breath she no longer had went out of her. She knew this place, the Western-style walls, the old castle behind the square. She had seen it 100 times on a screen, in a game she had played until her eyes burned. A story of nobles and saints and God-given callings called heavenly vocations. And this scene, this exact terrible scene, she knew too. The villainess of the game, condemned as a necromancer, executed in the square while the saint looked on. She was inside the game. She was inside its darkest ending, watching it happen for real. For a moment, the sheer size of it pinned her in place. The square was vast, ringed with soldiers, packed shoulder to shoulder with people who had come to this the way others came to a fair, with children on their fathers' shoulders, with bread in their hands, with laughter. The noise of them rolled up the stone walls and broke over her in a wave she could feel in her bones even without a body. This was not an accident of cruelty. This was a celebration of it, planned and permitted and cheered. Her eyes went to the platform. There stood the prince, Gilbert, the first prince, handsome in the cold, empty way a statue is handsome. He watched the condemned woman he had once agreed to marry, and there was nothing in his face at all. No pity, not even hate. Just a man waiting for an inconvenience to be over. And on his arm, the saint, Kiara Briscoe, golden-haired, sweet-faced, watching the ruin below her with a small, private smile she did not trouble to hide. She had won. The rival was going to die, and the crowd loved her for it, and she was savoring every second. Maya had spent her whole afterlife of a few minutes numb. She stopped being numb now. Something hot and old moved through the place where her heart used to be, because down there, bound and pleading, was a woman with dark hair and violet eyes. A woman who wanted so badly to live. A woman the whole world had decided to throw away. A woman who, Maya realized with a strange lurch, was named Maya too. The same name, the same grief riding under it. Because Maya knew that shape of loss, she had carried her own, a family gone in a single day and never coming back. She had died alone chasing them through a game. She knew what it was to be the last one left and to hate that you were the one who survived. She drifted lower. She could not help it. She wanted, uselessly, to stand between this woman and all of them. The guards moved. The crowd surged forward hungry for it. Maya did not watch the platform. She watched the woman's face instead, and the woman, impossibly, seemed to feel her there and turned. Across the whole roaring square, across the thin, cold border of death itself, their eyes met. Two violet gazes, the same, holding each other for one heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, Maya felt the border between them thin to nothing. It was not like looking at a stranger. It was like looking into a mirror that had been left out in the rain. The same face, the same eyes, the same wound of a family lost and a life spent alone, worn a little differently. She had thought she was here to watch. She understood, too late to pull back, that she had never been separate from this woman at all. Grief had called to grief across two worlds, and something had answered. Then it was done, and the square, the sun, the crowd, all of it, dropped away into a darkness so complete it had no top or bottom. And in that darkness, both women, the one who had just died and the one who had watched her die, heard the same voice, calm, female, enormous, the way a tide is enormous. Come, it said, cross to the other side of death, both of you, come together. Maya felt herself falling toward something. She did not fight it. Maya woke, and the ceiling was wrong. It was too close, and it was too high at the same time. and it glowed, a chandelier of soft magical light, not a single flame in it. She tried to lift her head to see more, and her head would not lift. She tried to raise a hand, and what came up into her narrow field of view was small and pink and clumsy, the fingers barely her own, an infant's hand. It took her a long, slow, horrified moment to assemble it. She could move her eyes, little else. She was swaddled in fine white cloth in a carved crib, and the mind doing the panicking inside this tiny body was hers, whole and adult, and entirely awake. She had died once already. She remembered that clearly. A small apartment, days lost inside a game with no food and no sleep. Her family already 3 years gone. Her own collapse quiet and unremarkable, and alone. That had been the end of her, and now here she was, small enough to fit in 2 hands, staring at a stranger's ceiling. Footsteps. 2 adults came to the side of the crib and looked down at her, and neither face held a scrap of warmth. A lord and a lady stood over the crib, well-dressed, handsome, cold. Her parents then. She understood that much without being told, the way you understand a thing in a dream. They did not coo at her. They talked over her, about her, as if she were already a line in a ledger. The Lord observed that the girl would grow into a great beauty, and that a beauty was wasted unless it was spent well, married up, married into royalty. The first prince, he mused, was the right age and the right blood. A perfect match. The lady laughed softly and said that would make them the parents of a queen one day, and called the thought delightful. Maya lay very still and listened, and the last pieces slid into place with a cold click. House Ashford. The prince named Gilbert, a daughter groomed from the cradle to be sold into the crown. She was not just reborn, she was reborn as her, the villainess, the dark-haired woman with the violet eyes she had watched die in the square. This was the beginning of that woman's life, and Maya already knew, to the day, how it ended, bound and pleading in a stone square while a crowd cheered and a saint smiled. She had been handed a life with the last page already written. Most people, she thought, would have wept. She had done her weeping in another world. What rose in her instead was colder and far more useful, because she knew something about this world that the lord and lady congratulating themselves did not. This world had necromancy, the one forbidden art that reached past the edge of death, that raised the dead and commanded them, and answered to no one who feared it. In her old life, she had played that class until she was the best in the country at it. She knew its bones, and necromancy, she understood in a single bright flash lying there in the crib, was the one power that might one day let her reach back across that same edge, to the family she had lost and never stopped grieving. The despair went out of her like water out of a cracked cup. Ambition rushed in to fill it. She had spent one whole life being the survivor, the one left behind, the one who could only watch. She was done watching. If the world had handed her the single power it feared above all others, and then dared her to survive holding it, then that was the world's mistake, not hers. She would not walk quietly to that square. She would awaken the necromancer calling sleeping inside this small body, and she would do it in secret, starting now, starting today, before she could even hold up her own head. She would grow strong enough to tear up the ending she had already seen. So while her parents planned her wedding over her cradle, the infant beneath them closed her eyes and got to work. She reached inward for the faint, warm current of mana in her chest, the way she remembered, and she began to move it, circulate, then release. A tiny pulse pushed outward and gone. It exhausted her almost at once. Her whole body ached with the effort of a single breath of magic. She rested. Then she did it again. Days passed, and Maya trained the way she had once played, obsessively, without mercy on herself. Wake with her mana pool full. Circulate, release, sleep to recover. Wake and do it again. The results frightened even her. Within a handful of days, the well of magic inside this infant body had swollen past the reserves of grown court mages who had trained for decades. It should have been impossible. It kept not being impossible every single morning, and that was a problem. A pulse of mana that size did not stay quiet. Any trained mage who came near would feel it rolling off the nursery like heat off a stove, and would start asking exactly the questions she could not afford. A necromancer infant in House Ashford would not live to see her first birthday, so she throttled herself. She switched to the slowest, softest release she could manage, bleeding her power out in a thin, quiet trickle instead of a wave, hiding the true size of what she was building. It galled her to go slow. She went slow anyway. She had learned patience the hard way, twice now. It was on one of those quiet evenings, as she let a slender thread of dark mana seep out into the still air, that the air answered back. Something drifted down out of nothing. A pale wisp of light, no bigger than a candle flame at first, thickening as it came until it took the loose shape of a woman, slender, half-formed, features flickering like a reflection on water. It hung over the crib and drank. Maya felt the thread of dark mana she had been releasing bend toward it and pour into it, and the shape drew brighter and steadier with every second. A spirit, bodiless, wandering, and pulled straight to her by the dark taste of her magic, exactly the way the dead were said to be. Maya, who could not yet speak and could barely move, watched it with clear violet eyes and felt no fear at all. She had commanded 10,000 of these in another life. She was not going to flinch at one. The spirit spoke, and its voice was a woman's, courteous and startled. "This mana," it breathed, turning the flavor of it over. "So dark, so dense. I have never. Being near you, child. I grow stronger, just breathing it in." Maya's mind was already 3 moves ahead. Here was the answer to her whole problem at once. She could not release her surplus power into the room without being sensed, but she could pour it into this. A hungry spirit was a sink with no bottom and no telltale. She could train at full strength, feed the overflow straight into her visitor, and leave nothing behind for anyone to detect. The spirit went still, studying the infant beneath it, and understanding dawned in its flickering face. "You are a necromancer," it said, half wonder and half something like hope. "Only a necromancer would carry mana like this. Only a necromancer could do what I need done." It drew closer, and its voice dropped into something careful and almost pleading. "My name is Rachel. In life, I served the crown, an agent, trained to slip in where I was not wanted, and to keep a quiet house as my cover. I have drifted a long time without a body." A pause, waited. "There is still something I have to do. I cannot do it like this. When you are grown, my lady, and strong enough, give me a body again. Do that, and I am yours. Every skill I have, everything I am, to the very end." A body was cheap. A loyal, deadly, invisible agent inside these hostile walls was worth more than Maya could easily say. It was, she thought, almost funny how good a bargain it was. She could not sign anything. She could not speak. So she did the only thing the infant body allowed. She met the spirit's eyes, and she moved her small hand in the clumsiest little gesture of agreement she could manage, once, deliberately. Rachel understood. The pale shape bowed low over the crib, the first bow anyone in this world had ever given the woman they all meant to throw away. "Then it is sworn," she said softly. "I will serve you to the utmost, my lady, from now until it is done." And the reborn villainess, days old, hidden in the heart of the house that meant to sell her, lay in her crib holding the exact power the world would one day kill her for, and had, at last, one person in it who had chosen her. She had 11 years before that square. She intended to use every one of them. She had 11 years before that square, and she intended to use every one of them. The trouble was that no one lets a prodigy grow in peace. So Maya decided the world would get no prodigy at all. By day, she was a disappointment, and she worked at it the way other children worked at being liked. She spoke late and badly. She fumbled her letters, forgot her curtsies, held a spoon as if it might bite her, though when no one was watching, her hands moved with the precision she had carried out of another life. Quick and exact, and entirely wrong for a child. Tutors sighed over her. Each year, her parents' hopes cooled another degree. That was the point. There was a colder reason for the act, one she never said aloud. Her body had been drilled far past its age, and her reflexes had opinions of their own. If a tutor cuffed her, or her father's hand came down the way it liked to, she was not certain she could stop what she would do back before it was done. It was safer for the whole house if the Ashfords went on believing she was nothing. The real work happened at night. When the manor slept, Maya poured everything she could not spend by day into Rachel, and Rachel drank it and grew, then slipped out through the walls and came back with company. Night after night, she brought the dead who were willing. "Another one wants to swear to you," Rachel murmured once, folding out of the dark with something like pride. "He says he'll follow anywhere, so long as it isn't quiet." The following climbed, past a dozen before Maya could walk a straight line, then dozens, sworn and silent, and hers. And somewhere in her 4th year, without ceremony, the thing the kingdom would one day kill her for simply settled onto her shoulders and stayed. Her Job had woken. She let no one see it. She had already, an army the size of a schoolroom, and not one adult in that house knew their daughter could raise the grave. The move came the year she turned 7. Her parents created the household for the capital, chasing the royal academy and the marriage it might buy them, the same academy, though they did not know it, that a certain golden saint would one day walk into as if she owned the story. Maya let them get as far as the crates. Then, on the morning of her 7th birthday, she asked her mother and father to sit down. She had a report to make. She told them, plainly, that her job had settled at last, and that she thought they should be the first to know. Her father lit up like a lamp. A Job this young, paraphrased through the room, his delight came in a rush. That was extraordinary, unheard of, a gift from the goddess herself. And did it mean, his voice climbing, did it mean their girl might be a saint? Her mother clasped her hands and agreed that an early calling could only sweeten their odds with Prince Gilbert. Maya waited for them to finish dreaming. Then she opened one hand, and the air above her palm filled with pale, drifting shapes, the wisps of the dead who had sworn to her, called up soft and glowing in the morning light. "It is necromancer," she said, and did not raise her voice at all. The word landed in the middle of the room and killed everything else in it. Her mother went white to the lips. Her father's grand, hopeful face came apart by pieces. Delight curdling into something closer to horror, because every soul in the kingdom knew which Job that was, and none of them had ever spoken it as a blessing. Understanding arrived a beat behind the fear, and it made things worse, because the necromancer was not merely cursed, it was the demon king's own job, the calling of the tyrant who had once ruled through terror and the risen dead. And Lord Ashford had just learned it was living under his roof and wearing his name. Whatever love he might have counted out for a daughter, there was none of it in him now. He crossed to the hearth, snatched up the iron that leaned there, and swung it at the child who had spoken. The room answered before Maya did. Rachel came out of the air between them, solid for the first time, a real hand closing on the iron mid-swing and stopping a grown man's whole strength as if she had caught a falling spoon. Then she turned, almost gently, and threw him. A lord of House Ashford went the length of his own drawing room and struck the far wall and slid down it, and the packing crates were the only witnesses that did not flinch. For a moment, nobody moved. The man who had ruled that house with the flat of his hand sat crumpled against his own wallpaper, breath knocked out of him, staring up at a 7-year-old who had not so much as stepped back. His wife had both hands pressed to her mouth, and Maya simply looked at him, at the great and frightening Lord Ashford, undignified on the floor, a small pale wisp drifting past his ear as if to see him better, and felt the whole shape of the house quietly turn over. It had never been his. It had only been waiting to be told so. Rachel stood over him, head tilted, light as anything. Say the word, and the house is empty by morning. All of it. No one would ever find where they went. No, Maya said. She said it without heat, the way you decline a second helping. They were still the blood that had raised her, such as it was, and a standing estate was worth more to her than an empty one. And, though she would not have called it out loud, she had no wish to become the monster the word in their mouths already promised she was. Sparing them cost her nothing, so she spared them, and set her terms instead. Let it be given out that the daughter of the house had fallen gravely ill. Let her be moved quietly, down into the manor's dungeon, and let no one above ever learn what her Job had turned out to be. The name of the house would survive. He would keep his standing, his schemes, his precious prince. He would simply keep them without her in the light. And should he refuse, she added, never lifting her voice, one drifting shape after another, gathering at her back until the wall behind her glowed, he might consider how very many of the dead were already listening. Beaten and pale, Lord Ashford agreed to every word. She walked down into the dungeon on her own 2 feet, which struck her as fitting. The Ashfords had always kept that dungeon for the children who displeased them, and here she was, displeasing them one last time on her own schedule. At the top of the stair, she allowed herself exactly one thing, a small, buried disappointment that some part of her had still, absurdly, half wanted them to say yes, to keep her. She looked at it for a moment, the way you look at a coin someone dropped. Then she left it on the step and went down, and did not pick it up again. There was a debt to settle first. Rachel had been promised a body, years ago now, in exchange for her service, and the promise was long overdue. Maya meant to pay it. Whatever you want, she told her. Ask for it plainly. Rachel asked for a grown woman's form, strong, quick, adult, something that could stand in front of her lady and mean it, and go anywhere a fight might be waiting. Maya inclined her head. Then that's what you'll have. It was in the dark of that corridor, walking deeper, that Rachel began to speak of the others. The great dead scattered across the land who might be persuaded to kneel. There was a mage, she said, so mighty in life that death had only made him a lich, and he sat in a maze of a tomb far to the west, master of spatial magic, waiting for someone worth following. Maya's eyes sharpened at that. Spatial magic could move a whole army and let no one see it march. There was more. A headless knight, once a champion of the greatsword, haunting a ruined castle in the north. A soldier who could not accept that his kingdom had fallen and who wanted only a new lord to serve. A martial master of the far east who had worked himself into his grave, whose corpse had since gone missing from it, which meant some other hand out there was already gathering the powerful dead, and the bones of a giant warrior, broken up and sold off piece by piece as trophies for noble halls, crying out in the way only the dead can hear to be made whole again. Maya listened to all of it, and for the first time since the drawing room, she smiled. She had walked into a cell, and she had walked into a workshop, and the difference was going to be entirely up to her. She turned and went on down the corridor, her spirits drifting after, and the dark closed over them like a door. 11 years is a long time to leave a clever woman alone with her ambition. She had gone down at 7. She did not come back up. And in the years that passed, the bare stone cell became something the family upstairs would not have recognized and were careful never to visit. Blue flame lamps burned cold along the walls. Skulls sat among fine furniture like ornaments. There were heated baths, wards against the underground chill, comforts a good many noble apartments could not match. All of it raised by an undead craftsman among her growing household of the dead, who found his mistress's taste for the theatrical deeply amusing. She had made herself a court beneath the earth, while the world above forgot she was breathing. Now 18, black hair pinned up in careless braids, round glasses catching the blue light, a baggy dark robe pooling at her feet. Maya stood over a vat and stirred. The liquid in it was a deep, ugly purple, and it was very nearly finished, and it was going to need something living to finish on. Her father came down the long stair to find her like that, and sighed at the sight of her, the way one sighs at a stain that will not come out. He had news, and he plainly relished it. Paraphrased through the cold room, it came out grand and false. A marriage had been arranged for her at last. A great honor. A match with the Lord of the Frontier. The border count the whole kingdom whispered about. The one men called the Monster Count. A violent, warlike thing, said to be so hideous he never came out of his armor. The crown itself had blessed the union, her father said, a reward for his own long service. And under his breath, thinking her deaf to it, he let slip the truer reason. It would finally be rid of a troublesome daughter. Maya took the decree from his hand and read it, unhurried, all the way down. "This is a strange little story," she said at last, turning the page toward the lamplight. She asked him, mild as milk, whether he truly believed this was the king's own will, or whether, if she read carefully enough, she ought to feel a different hand underneath the ink. A first prince's hand, Gilbert's. That struck a nerve, because it was true. His face went ugly. He snapped that she should keep her baseless suspicions behind her teeth, that she would go to the frontier whether she willed it or not, and if he had to send her there by force, then so be it. He reached to take hold of her arm. The blade was at his throat before his fingers ever closed. Rachel stood between them, and she had not been there a breath before. The promise from the dungeon corridor had been kept, and then some. She wore a made body now, assembled and animated by Maya's own art, a beautiful thing with a blue bob and pale ice blue eyes, the faint pale seams of its making, the only sign it had ever been anything but a woman, dressed neat as any manner maid. The dagger in her hand did not waver a hair. "You will not put a hand on my lady," she told him. He recoiled, and he was frightened, and because he was frightened, he reached for the only weapon a small man keeps. He sneered that she was nothing, a stitched-together corpse playing at a person. Rachel's expression did not change. "A dead woman owes your rank nothing," she said, and the cold in it was worse than the blade. "I have one master in this world, and you are a long way from being her." Rachel. Maya did not even look up from the decree. Not his throat. Not yet. She let the pause do the rest, then explained herself with the patience of someone discussing the weather. She still needed him breathing a while longer. The thing in the vat was nearly done, and it was going to want a living subject to be tested on, and there he conveniently was. Rachel drew the blade back a hand's width. She did not sheathe it, and she did not step away, and the look she kept on Lord Ashford promised that the distance was a favor and not a pardon. Twice now, the great lord who had thrown his daughter into a cell had ended up on the wrong end of her mercy, once against a wall at 7, once against a knife at 18. and twice she had chosen to let him live. It was not forgiveness, it was arithmetic. The papers were already signed and blessed. In a season's turning, she would be packed off to the death-cursed frontier to be quietly forgotten by everyone who had signed them. Maya folded the decree and set it beside the vat, and found, a little to her own surprise, that she was beginning to look forward to the trip. She had spent 11 years learning to wait. Whoever this monster count was, whoever thought the frontier would be the end of her, they were about to learn what she had built in the dark, and they were going to learn it a long, long way from anyone who could help them. The powder was finished. 11 years of work sat in a single glass vial, and Maya held it up to the light. A fine dark purple, dry as ash, humming faintly with the thing she had built into it. "Zombie powder," she said, more to the vial than to anyone. "Drink it, and you stop being alive. Drink it, and you never died again." That was the whole trick of it. Her necromancy could raise a corpse and bind a spirit, but it could not touch her own living body. A caster could not turn herself undead. So she had spent a decade teaching a powder to do what her magic refused. One day, she would drink it herself. One day, unbound from a mortal lifespan, she would have the centuries it might take to master the deeper art. Soul summoning, calling a soul back across death itself, or across the gap between one world and another. She had a family waiting on the far side of that gap. She meant to reach them, but a new thing wanted testing before she trusted her own throat to it. Her father was still where Rachel had left him, kneeling on the cold floor of the dungeon that had been his cruelty and had become her workshop. Maya crouched to his level and turned the vial so he could see it catch the blue flame. Immortality, she told him. The very thing he had chased his whole grasping life. She could give it to him right now. Lord Ashford wept. He did not want it. Not like this. Not turned into one of the dead. He begged, the way a man begs when he has finally understood what his daughter is. He pressed his forehead to the stone and pleaded not to be made undead. Maya watched him a moment, then stood. "No," she said, capping the vial. "You'd be a waste of good powder." Killing him gained her nothing. It only stamped the word they had all pinned on her, villainous, a little deeper into her own skin. A broken man sobbing on the floor was already exactly as small as he was ever going to get. She would test the powder on someone she actually had a use for. The husband, she decided. The frontier count she had never met. The one the whole capital whispered about like a monster under the bed. He would do nicely. She flicked 2 fingers, and Rachel hauled the lord up by the collar and marched him out into the dark. Rachel came back and stopped dead at the sight of her. "You are not leaving looking like that," the maid said. Maya glanced down at herself, the shapeless robe, the careless braids, the round glasses she wore because she liked them. She had been planning to travel exactly as she was. "It's a long road. Comfort matters. You are a bride riding to meet a count." Rachel plucked the robe's sleeve between 2 fingers like it might bite her. "You look like something they keep in the cellar. My pride will not survive it." There was no arguing with Rachel when her pride got involved. Maya sighed and let herself be handled. Hair combed out and rebraided neat. The round glasses swapped for a clean pair. The robe traded for a formal dark dress that actually acknowledged she had a shape. While she dressed, she emptied the lair. One slow sweep of her hand, and the tables folded out of the world. The vats, the shelves, the skull-topped lamps, the heated baths, all of it drawn down into her dimensional storage until the dungeon was bare stone again, the way it had been the day she chose it. She was not coming back. She wanted nothing here left to come back for. For the gowns, she called the Lich. Zoran answered from wherever he kept himself, his voice arriving straight inside her skull, courteous as ever, and a rack of fine traveling dresses simply appeared out of the empty air from his spatial store. Rachel chose one. Maya wore it. When they were done, she looked for the first time in years like the daughter of a great house instead of the thing that house locked away. "Better," Rachel decided. "You're insufferable," Maya said, and meant it fondly. They walked out into the dusk. No carriage waited at the gate. By custom, a house sent its bride off with one, and her father had pointedly provided nothing, a small cheap insult on the way out the door. Maya noted it and did not care. She had better transport than anything with the Ashford crest on it. She was 3 steps past the gate when a voice called after her. It was a woman's voice, bright and sweet and coated in poison, and it wished her good riddance, sang it almost, as though watching Maya leave was the happiest thing that had happened all week. Maya stopped. She did not turn right away. She had a guess already about who owned a voice like that. The saint stepped out of the shadow of the wall. Maya knew her on sight. Golden hair, blue eyes, the white and gold robes, the sweet face the whole kingdom adored. Kiara Briscoe, the celebrated saint, the story's heroine, the woman who had stood beside the prince at an execution in a dream. Maya could not stop dreaming. Maya kept her own face blank and asked, mildly, whether they had met, because she was fairly sure the woman had her confused with someone else. Kiara laughed and told her to drop the act. Then, in that same syrup voice, she said the thing that changed everything. She knew exactly who Maya was. She remembered her as the villainess of a story, a game, a script the two of them had both once played from the other side of another life. Kiara was a reincarnator, so was Maya, and Kiara had come, sweetly, to gloat about it. She actually complained, about how badly Maya's character had wronged her in that old story, as though the plot of a game were a debt owed to her in the flesh, and she confessed the rest of it without a flicker of shame, proud of herself. The marriage to the frontier count had been her doing. She had arranged it. She had reached into the prince's ear, who did whatever she asked, she boasted, because he adored her, and she had aimed a villainess she found inconvenient straight at the deadliest corner of the map to be rid of her cleanly. "Be gone by morning," she added. The monster on the border was already expecting his bride, so there it was. Not the prince's scheme after all, or not only his. The hand behind the exile had a sweet face, and a saint's robes, and a reincarnator's memory, and it had just introduced itself. Rachel drifted a half step forward and murmured, so quietly only Maya could hear, a single question, whether she should simply kill her. "No," Maya said under her breath, "I want to keep this one." A dead saint would only be replaced by whatever the prince trusted next, and the next one might be smart enough to strike from the dark. This one had walked up to her in the open and told her everything. This one was useful. This one, Maya decided, was going to learn a lesson she would carry the rest of her life. Kiara, watching them whisper, mistook the pause for fear. She lifted her chin and reminded Maya, kindly, that necromancy was a filthy little art, and that holy magic unmade the dead, that a saint had nothing to fear from a grave robber. "You should have stayed home," Maya told her. Maya raised one hand. The street changed. The air went thick and cold, pressing down like water. The evening lamps shrank to blue points and flickered. A low tremor rolled up through the cobblestones and set every loose thing rattling. The passers-by who had slowed to watch went very still, and then began, quietly, to back away. She opened her fingers, and she opened the air. Holes tore open in the world above the street, dozens of them, then hundreds. Dark rents in the dusk, with something waiting behind each one. And the dead came through. They came in a flood. Zombies hauled themselves up out of nothing and dropped to the stones with a wet thud, rank on rank of them. Skeletons unfolded and stood in rattling ranks, empty sockets swiveling to face one small golden woman. Pale spirits poured out between them and drifted low over the crowd like fog with faces in it. More than 1,000 of the dead filled the street from wall to wall, shoulder to shoulder, all of them silent, all of them looking at Kiara, all of them waiting on the woman with her hand in the air. The saint's smile finally cracked. She did what a saint does. She called on her holy magic, the thing that had made her, the sacred light that turned the walking dead to dust and drifting ash, her one true advantage in all the world. She called it up with the full force of her office and flung it at the horde, and nothing happened. The light broke over the front rank of the dead and simply guttered out, soaked up and gone, like a candle held to the sea. Not one zombie so much as flinched. Not one skeleton crumbled. The spirits did not even slow. Holy magic scaled to ordinary undead, a handful of shambling corpses, a haunt or two. It had never been built to touch 1,000 souls bound at once by a master who commanded them like fingers on a hand. The gap between a village saint and what Maya had become in the dark was not a gap she could pray across. Maya watched the light die and felt something settle in her chest, cold and clean, and long overdue. "The difference between us," she said, "is just how much power the caster has. That's all it ever was." The dead took one step forward, together, 1,000 feet coming down on the stone at once. Kiara's eyes rolled white. She got out one thin cry, disbelief, then raw animal terror. And then the darling saint of the whole kingdom folded straight down onto the cobblestones in a dead faint, out cold before she landed, in front of everyone she had ever ruled. For a long moment, nobody moved. The crowd had come out to see the villainess shipped off in disgrace. Instead, they were staring at their saint, sprawled senseless on the cobblestones, mouth open, all her gold gone gray in the lamplight, and at the calm woman in the dark dress who had put her there without raising her voice. Maya let them look. She did not touch Kiara. She did not need to. The humiliation was already done, and it was doing more work lying there in the street than any knife could have. These were people who had worshipped this woman. She could feel feel their faith cracking from here, the first hairline doubt spreading through the crowd like frost. That was enough. Not everything, nothing close to everything, but enough for tonight. She fainted right when it was getting interesting, Maya remarked, to no one in particular, and turned to go. Royal knights arrived at last, boots hammering, blades half drawn. They came around the corner ready for a villainess, and they met 1,000 of the dead standing silent between them and her, and a woman walking away as though they were furniture. Every one of them stopped. Not a single sword came the rest of the way out of its sheath. They stood frozen in their good armor, and they let her pass, and the shame of that would follow them home. Maya walked through the stunned crowd and out toward the city gate, Rachel at her shoulder, the dead parting around them and closing behind. "I'm bound for the frontier," she said, "to the street, to the capital, to all of it." Then she was through the gate and gone. Past the walls, no one came after her. She let the dead go first. One backward pull of her hand, and the whole 1,000 poured back into their pocket of the air, the tears in the world sealing shut behind them, until the road was only a road under the moon, and the city was a smear of light behind her shoulder. For a moment, she looked back at it, and felt the old cold thing turn over in her chest. She knew why the capital always tasted like this to her. She still dreamed it, a square packed with people, and herself up on the scaffold, and every one of those cheerful upturned faces roaring approval while she was put to death. It was only a dream. It had never happened to her, this Maya, in this life, but she had watched it happen to the woman whose body she now wore, and the crowd in the dream cheered the same way this crowd had come out tonight to jeer, and some part of her had decided long ago that she owed this city nothing but distance. Tonight, she had finally taken it. She called Zoran again. The Lich answered inside her mind, courteous, and told her to leave it to him, and out of the empty air, his spatial store gave up a carriage and a horse. The carriage was a fine dark thing, built by an undead craftsman to hold together at a killing pace and keep its rider soft and safe inside. The horse was Sleipnir. He came out of nowhere at a happy trot, an 8-legged zombie stallion the size of a small barn, all 8 hooves drumming the road, thrilled to be running. Maya had given him the extra legs herself, years back, at his own eager insistence. He had wanted to be faster, and she was not a mistress who said no to a good horse. She laid her hand on his cold muzzle. "Good boy," she told him. "Carry me all the way to the frontier. Can you do that for me?" Sleipnir whinnied and stamped, delighted. Rachel swung up into the driver's seat and took the reins. Maya climbed into the carriage and sank back into cushions built exactly for this, and the whole thing lurched forward and then flew, 8 legs eating the dark road at a speed no living horse could dream of. She was leaving the capital alive. That, more than any of it, was the thing she turned over as the night streamed past. The execution written for her, the fate the game had handed the villainess, broken clean and left behind in the dust. Somewhere out ahead in the dark was a border. Everyone called cursed, and a husband everyone called a monster, and a powder in her storage with his name half written on it. She found she was not afraid of any of it. She was, if anything, curious, warm, safe, and finally moving in the direction she had chosen. Maya closed her eyes and, to the sound of 8 hooves and the wind, fell asleep. The dream always began with a battle she was losing. Banners were going down across the field. Half her side had already been knocked out of the war event, locked away for days by a game that punished the dead harder than the living, and the players still standing had stopped fighting to argue about surrender. Then, someone in the scroll of chat noticed her, the country's finest necromancer, still on her feet at the back of a broken line, and the noise changed from despair to something like hope. The avatar that wore her name lifted both hands. The spell she cast reached every corpse on the field at once. Her own fallen stood back up. So did the enemy's aces, hauled up out of the bodies they had died in, and every one of them turned and answered to her now instead of to the side they had fought for. The whole battle tipped over in a single breath. Her people won. She did not cheer with them. She only looked at the ones she had raised and told them, quiet under all the celebration, that heroes should never be allowed to die. She meant it more than they knew. She had already learned by then exactly how easy it was to lose the ones who deserved to last. Then the dream did what it always did. It stopped being a game. She remembered the 3 of them, her father, a decorated pilot who had flown for his country and come home with rank and a chest of medals. Her mother, a surgeon whose hands were famous for saving the people no one else would touch. Her brother, who drew comics half the country had grown up on, whose stories had been made and remade for every kind of screen. 3 heroes out of one small family, and all of them gone together on the same bright afternoon. A road, another car coming the wrong way, and nothing left for anyone to do about it. She had been sick that day. She was the one who had told them to go on without her. After the funerals, she stopped going to work. She stopped answering the people who called. She stopped eating on any schedule she could name and stopped sleeping altogether and poured whatever was left of herself into the game, because in the game at least, the dead came back the moment she called them. She had gone 3 days without food or rest when she rose to cross the room and the floor came up to meet her. Lying there, feeling her own body quietly finish what the grief had started, she thought only one thing clearly, that her life was a small, cheap thing set beside theirs, and no great loss. On the screen above her head, strangers were still typing her name, still calling her a hero, still begging the best necromancer in the world to keep playing beside them forever. She never lived to hear a word of it. Maya woke in the carriage with the taste of that ending still in her mouth. Morning had come up gray and ordinary beyond the window. Rachel, without turning from the reins, told her they were nearly there. Windsound, the fortress city at the heart of the Ravenmarch frontier, the seat of House Ravenwood, and the home of the husband Maya had crossed a kingdom to meet. Maya sat up and looked out. A city was rising ahead of them on high ground, ringed in walls far thicker than anything in the capital, its towers set close and low with the hard economy of a place that had been attacked many times and fully expected to be attacked again. Past it, the dark line of an enormous forest ran off toward the border and did not stop. They build like people who plan to lose the first wall and hold the second, she said. Rachel answered that the frontier had been fighting the monsters of that forest and the empire beyond it, since long before either of them had first drawn breath. It was, she said, a place that measured its wealth in survivors. At the gate, the guards waved the fine carriage through with barely a question, though every last one of them stared at the thing pulling it. Sleipnir bore the staring without breaking stride. Maya leaned just far enough out the window to call him a new breed brought down from the capital, and the word breed did all the work she needed. The spears came up, the gate swung wide, and they rolled through into the city itself, and the city closed around her, and she understood what kind of place she had come to. Windsound was a warrior's city, and it wore its dead out in the open. From the eaves of house after house hung small figures, dolls no longer than a forearm, stitched and carved and bound with cord, turning slowly on their strings in the cold wind. Maya watched them swing past the glass. Some houses kept a single one. Some kept 3 or 4 in a patient row above the door. Whole streets of them swayed together, a soft crowd of hanging shapes over the heads of the living, who walked beneath them without once looking up. Rachel explained it before Maya had to ask. Each doll held the soul of a warrior who had fallen, kept close by the family it belonged to, in the stubborn hope that one day something would come and call that soul home. A house that hung, one had lost someone to the forest or the border. A street full of them was a street full of waiting. Maya took it in slowly. The thin, worn faces in the road, the little shrines at the corners, the wind full of swaying dead, and felt something she had not come here expecting to feel. Not dread, recognition. She had traveled across a whole kingdom to marry a monster, and had arrived instead in the single place she had ever seen where death was already half the population, and the living spent their days praying it could be undone. These people wanted, out loud and without shame, the exact thing she had crossed 2 worlds to learn how to give. "This is good ground," she said, almost to herself. Rachel asked, "Dry, good for what?" So Maya told her the truth she had told no one else in this world. She had not come here to be anyone's wife. She had come because a border soaked in its own war dead was the richest soil a necromancer could ever be handed, a place to grow her strength out of the kingdom's sight, to build something that was hers and answered only to her, and, if the country that had thrown her away ever stood across her road, a place from which to take that country apart. She laid it all out plainly, the way other people discuss the weather, and beneath every word of it, unspoken, because Rachel already knew, sat the one thing she truly wanted at the end of all of it, the 3 she had failed, standing up again, the day she finally learned how to call them back. She lifted her eyes to the castle towers waiting above the rooftops, and did not look away from them. Sleipnir was led off toward the stables, where the handler came no nearer to him than his duty strictly required. Inside, the castle surprised her. She had expected a war camp or a mad lord's ruin, and found instead something plain and quietly fine. Good carpet worn soft underfoot, carvings kept simple, every piece of it built to outlast the men who made it, rather than to impress the ones who visited. To her own faint irritation, she felt at ease the moment she stepped in. Then the butler came to meet them, and the ease thinned out of the room. He was an older man, gray at the hair and gray in the eye, a monocle catching the light. Everything about him formal, past the point where formality becomes an insult. He asked smooth as glass, whether the young lady of House Ashford found the castle to her liking, naming her by the house she had been born to, as though the wedding had simply never taken place. Maya corrected him without heat. She named herself in full, a daughter of House Ashford, yes, and now Maya of House Ravenwood, wed to its count, and let the second half of it hang in the air between them. As my lady says, he answered, and introduced himself as nothing grander than the butler in the count's service. It was then that Rachel changed. Maya felt it before she saw it, the temperature at her own shoulder seeming to drop, the way a room can feel a drawn blade before it sees one. Rachel had gone perfectly, unnaturally still. Her eyes were fixed on the butler's gray face, and under her breath, pitched so low that only Maya could catch it. She said that she had finally found the sword demon, and that this time she would not let him go. The butler gave no sign of hearing it, or he heard it and chose the discourtesy of pretending otherwise. He told them the count was occupied with his duties and would not receive her until nightfall, and offered Maya a guest room rather than the countess's own quarters, adding, mild as warm milk, that she might not care to stay long enough to have need of them. Maya thanked him warmly for his honesty, exactly as if he had meant it as a kindness. Something flickered once behind the monocle. Then he excused himself and withdrew. Alone with her maid, Maya asked. Rachel gave her only a little. In life, the butler had been a mercenary, a famous one, feared across the continent under that same name, the Sword Demon, and the two of them shared a history she plainly did not intend to spread out on the table just yet. But Maya remembered that Rachel had once spoken of business. She meant to finish the day she stood in a body of her own again, and she understood now exactly what that business had always been. Then do as you need to, Maya told her. When you want him, say the word, and I'll help you take him. Rachel asked only to watch him, for now, and to choose her own moment. Maya agreed, and let the matter lie where it fell. Night came down over the frontier, and the count did not. Maya had dressed for the meeting regardless, an evening gown in place of the road dress, her hair loose, the whole quiet performance of a bride who expects a husband, half because she was curious what the man would do when he saw her, and half because she wanted his measure taken before she decided whether the dark purple powder in her storage would find its way into his cup. The candles burned lower, her mood curdled with them. When Rachel murmured at last that someone was coming down the corridor, Maya sent her out of sight. The man who opened the door stood armored head to foot. A closed helm hid his face entirely, and when he spoke, his voice came out flat and scraped and wrong, bent through some magic device until nothing human was left in the sound of it. He did not sit. He did not come a single step nearer than the doorway. In that ruined, altered voice, he told her, plainly and without preamble, that he would never love her, that he would not be charmed by her, would not be worked by her, and would not, under any circumstance, be fooled. Then he named her what he had already decided she was, a spy planted inside his house by Prince Gilbert and the First Prince's faction, sent to pry his frontier open from within. His house, he said, was the shield of the whole kingdom, and it had never yet knelt to any prince. It would not begin with the woman they had wrapped up and mailed to his gate. Maya said almost nothing to it. Inwardly, she was too busy being annoyed with herself to bother. She had walked into this marriage thinking about powders and undead armies and the Count's monstrous reputation, and had somehow never once done the plain arithmetic that a child raised in a scheming house should have done before anything else. That a prince who wanted this stubborn, independent frontier would look for the fastest key to its front door, and that a discarded villainess with no allies made a very convenient key. She had been handed to this man as a weapon. He was not wrong to hold her at arm's length. He turned to leave, and there it was, the one thing all that steel could not cover. His walk, stiff, careful, oddly short in the stride, as if the shape moving around inside the armor did not remotely match the size of the fearsome legend bolted to the outside of it. The door shut hard behind him, and she was left staring at the place where he had stood. Rachel slipped back into the room the instant he was gone. Maya was already smiling. She told her maid to let the others out, quietly, into the walls and the stairwells and the cellars of the whole castle, and to learn everything worth learning, what the Count truly was under all that steel, why a grown man walked like that, what the gray butler was so carefully guarding, which servants in this household could be turned to her side, and which could not. If the marriage was a trap, she said, then she would simply take the castle the trap had been laid in from the inside, one loyal servant and one buried secret at a time. Rachel, plainly pleased with the assignment, went to work. Maya settled back among the burnt-down candles and considered the closed door. She had been told, in so many words, to stay in her room and touch nothing that was his. She had never once, in either of the lives she had lived, been any good at that. Being ordered to keep still only ever made her want to see how much of a house she could quietly take apart while no one thought to watch her do it. Somewhere above her in the dark, a husband she had not yet laid eyes on was surely congratulating himself on holding the line against the prince's clever little spy. He had no idea at all what he had just done. He had invited the finest necromancer of 2 whole worlds under his roof, insulted her, and left her alone with his household for the night. The morning after her husband called her a spy, Maya put the dead to work. She did not argue the charge. Arguing was for people who lost. On the surface, she played the obedient bride, quiet and compliant, exactly as the armored count had ordered. Beneath the floors, her undead moved through the castle like a second staff no one had hired. Ghosts counted doors. A zombie hound nosed through the garden earth. By the end of the first week, she knew which servant owed money, which one still hated the first prince, and which one had broken something valuable and buried the proof. Rachel handled the butler. Every morning she went to Craig with a fresh complaint about her lady's mistreatment, and every morning the old swordmaster stood there and took it, gray and rigid behind his monocle, while the rest of the house emptied of watching eyes. Maya noticed how much her maid seemed to enjoy the errand. She filed the thought away and asked nothing. That was how she came to know about the pot. A young maid brought her supper and set it down without a word, chin up, treating her like an enemy the first prince had mailed to the frontier. Maya did not look up from her book. "There's no need to be so prickly," she said, "especially not with someone who already knows about the pot." The girl stopped as if she had walked into glass. "I have no idea what my lady means." Maya told her mildly that she meant the master-crafted piece the girl had shattered while cleaning the treasure vault and buried in 3 pieces under the garden hedge. The maid's face went white. She begged in a rush for the matter to stay secret, or the head maid would have her out on the road by nightfall. Instead of a threat, Maya slid something across the table. An identical pot, flawless, the twin of the one now in shards under the hedge, drawn from her own endless collection. She asked only that the girl slip it back into place and think of her a little more kindly. The maid clutched it to her chest and stammered that she would do anything, that she would help settle her lady into the house herself. Then she was gone, quick and grateful, and Maya turned a page. It was almost too easy. She had 11 years of practice and more wealth than this whole castle would see in its lifetime, and she was spending both to buy a household one frightened girl at a time. She could have ruled the place through fear in an afternoon. She had chosen not to. Somewhere under the strategy sat a smaller, stubborn wish she did not examine too closely. She did not want these people to look at her the way House Ashford once had, the year she was 7 and told them what she was, and watched every face she loved go stiff with horror. Not again, not here. The gardeners had lost the flower beds to caterpillars, so Maya offered to clear them in a single night. At midnight, she and Rachel walked out among the hedges, and Maya drew a green-skinned zombie from a fold in the air, a squat, grinning thing named Ghast. He opened his mouth and breathed a slow purple gas across the beds. The caterpillars dropped from the leaves in a soft, steady rain, and the flowers never so much as wilted. "They're just falling off," Rachel murmured, watching them patter down. "You're certain that fog won't take the roses with them?" Maya was certain. By morning, the beds were clean, and when the gardener asked how, she told him pleasantly that it was a new insecticide from the capital, and let him believe her. It went on like that. The great undead horse in the stables, the 8-legged brute no groom could hold, broke its own fence to reach her and pressed its cold skull to her shoulder like a dog, while the stable hands stood frozen. The kitchen, plagued a full month by cuts and small fires, went quiet the day she walked in, named the evil spirits crowding the water, and snapped them out of the air with 2 fingers. The head chef asked, half afraid, whether she was some kind of saint. She said no, and thought privately of a real saint who had fainted at her feet not long ago, and had been no more impressive than the spirits over the sink. 2 weeks in, the fear in the servant's eyes had turned to something warmer. She had not raised her voice once. The husband still had not come to see her, and the butler was still cold as his own blade. But the house was thawing around her, room by room, and she found she liked it more than she had expected to. She was reading when the flower fell. One blue bloom dropped from the vase on the sill, its whole head at once, and struck the stone with a small wet sound. Maya looked at it a moment too long. Then the cold ran up the back of her neck, the old familiar pull, and she knew what it was before she named it: undead. A great mass of them moving, and not hers. Rachel came through the door at a near run. The frontier army was out past the walls on a monster call, she said, Kane and Craig both leading it, and something had gone wrong in the great forest. Maya was already on her feet. The dead were pouring out of the tree line toward the men her husband led, the men of the town she had spent 2 weeks quietly learning to protect. A wiser woman, a colder one, might have let the frontier's lord die out there and inherited the whole thing clean. She surprised herself by not even considering it. This land is mine to look after now, she said, reaching for the black dress and not the safe one. I'm not going to let some stray corpses have it. Rachel asked to go alone, to keep her lady out of it. Maya told her to fetch the horse instead. On her way out, she called down the corridor for the servants to draw baths and lay a hot supper, bright and easy, as if she were only stepping out for air. She was bringing a treat home to her hard-working husband, she said. Let them not worry. Sleipnir did not wait for a groom. The undead stallion smashed clean through the stable wall, all 8 hooves thundering across the yard, and reached the gate before anyone could shout. Maya swung up and Rachel behind her, and the horse hit the road at a run that no living beast could have matched, the fortress falling away behind them and the black line of the great forest swelling ahead. For 2 weeks she had kept her power folded small and hidden, the mount stabled, the undead disguised, the truth of her held back out of a soft, foolish hope that she could belong here without them seeing. That was over now. They were about to see all of it. She leaned low over the cold neck and let the horse run. They were losing. The army had fallen back from the tree line to the open ground, the city wall at their backs, and Kane stood at the center of the line in his full dark plate, battle axe swinging, roaring at his men to hold. The things coming out of the forest did not make it easy. They were wolf-shaped and eyeless, big as great cats, and where a wolf should have had a face, they had rings of small fanged mouths. More than 50 of them hit the line at once. Craig met one head-on and split it in 2 with a single stroke of his long blade. The 2 halves landed in the mud, and then, wetly, began to crawl back toward each other and knit shut. The old swordmaster went very still. These things did not bleed, he called to his lord. They carried no life in them at all. They were already dead. Kane sent him to the left flank, where the line was folding, and refused a single guard for himself. A lord who could not hold his own ground, he told them, had no business holding a domain, and his house was the shield of the whole kingdom, or it was nothing. 2 soldiers stayed at his shoulder, men he named Ted and Sonder, and held with him as a black rush came out of the dark. Ted and Sonder did not survive it. The wave broke over Kane and bore him down into the mud. A beast landed on his chest, all those little mouths gaping, and his magic armor answered a half-second too slow. Pinned out of strength, he stopped fighting. Without a sound, he asked his dead parents to forgive him for losing the frontier they had died to keep. The fangs came down. The sun went out, not with a cloud, not with nightfall. Something rose up between the plain and the last of the light, and simply blotted it, and the whole battlefield fell into a cold blue dusk that had no business being there. The wolf thing on Kane's chest hesitated. One heartbeat, its ring of mouths turned upward. A hand of bone the size of a cart closed around it and tore it off him. It stood over the field like a walking cathedral, a skeleton, but grown vast beyond reason. Near 20 meters of yellowed bone stacked into the shape of a warrior, taller than the watchtowers of Windsound, its empty sockets lit with 2 slow flames of blue fire. Where it moved, the ground shook. Where its shadow fell, the little mouths of the dead wolves shrank back. It held the beast that had nearly killed the frontier's lord pinched between 2 fingers, the way a person holds a spider by one leg, and then it flicked its wrist and the thing was gone, flung a quarter-mile back into the trees. High on the giant's shoulder, small and dark against the last red edge of the sky, stood a woman in a black dress. Maya looked down at the wreck of the battle, at her husband flat in the mud, and staring up at the impossible thing that had saved him, and she raised her voice just enough to carry. "Reinforcements," she called down. "I brought a care package." 2 of the wolf beasts wheeled from the line and leapt for the giant, for her, jaws wide. She did not so much as lean back. The Skull Titan's other hand came around in a lazy backhand sweep and swatted both of them out of the air, and they sailed screaming over the tree line and were gone, hundreds of meters into the dark forest. She clicked her tongue at the monster on her husband, or where it had been, and remarked that it had a great deal of nerve, trying to pin a woman's husband to the ground before his own wife had gotten the chance. Below her, Kane had not moved. He was still staring up. Kane found his voice and asked, through the bent hum of his helm, whether it was truly her moving the giant, whether she was the one doing all of this. He sounded less like a man afraid and more like a man who had just seen the shape of the world change. Some small part of Maya noted, with an ache she did not have time for, that even now his heart had not opened to her the way the whole household's had. She set it aside. There was work. She sent Rachel to the failing left flank, and her maid was gone in a blur, blade out, cutting wolf beasts down 2 at a time on the way to Craig, moving through the slaughter with an eagerness that a quieter day might have been worth asking about. Then Maya turned her attention to the 2 men in the mud who had held the line beside her husband and paid for it. She could feel them still. Not their bodies, the lingering will of them, the part that had refused to leave the frontier even after the frontier had finished with them. She crouched at the edge of the Titan's shoulder and spoke to the dead the way a commander speaks to soldiers she means to keep. "You still want to defend this place," she said. "I can feel it, even now. Good, then come with me to the other side of death and keep fighting." Ted and Sander rose out of the churned ground, paler than before, eyes gone a low red, and stronger, far stronger than they had ever been in life. Ted turned his head toward his stunned lord and told him plainly that he and Sander were already dead, that it was all right, and that thanks to the lady, they could fight on. Then the 2 of them fell on the wolf beasts that had killed them and tore the pack apart. Maya reached out across the whole field and gave the same gift to every fallen frontier soldier lying in the mud. They stood. The Titan waded in among them, and the strengthened dead closed with the last of the wolves, and one by one, the little ringed mouths went silent for good. For a breath, it was over. Then Rachel's voice cut across the field, sharp with warning, telling her to look up. The sky was turning black, not with cloud, with wings. A swarm of undead beetles, scarabs the size of large hounds, rose out of the forest in their thousands and blotted the stars the way the Titan had blotted the sun. Craig, somewhere off in the dark, named them deep dungeon monsters that hungered for flesh and never, ever came up where people lived. Now they were dead and airborne, and there was nothing on the ground that could reach them. Through the hum of his helm, Kane despaired. At this rate, he said, he could not protect the town at all. Maya was not worried about the sky. She reached into the fold in the air and drew out a lich, a robed skeleton crowned in old gold. And Craig, who had fought his way back to her side, said flatly that even court mage magic could not burn a swarm that size, that one dead mage would not be enough. The lich answered him without a mouth, his voice arriving inside their skulls, dry and offended. He asked Craig not to confuse him with the soft court mages of this soft and peaceful age, and he asked mildly who had ever said he would be doing it alone. Maya summoned the other 3. They came up out of nothing, 4 of them now, and as she fed dark mana into their bones, the bones answered, flesh climbing back over them until 4 striking men stood on the ruined plain in the blue firelight. Zoran, Lysander, who threw open his robe to bare his chest to the night and asked, grinning, whether he might go all out. Nathaniel, who looked up at the black swarm and said he almost pitied it, catching grand magic from 4 leeches at once. Tobias, who only put out his hand and asked her for more mana so he could crank the whole thing to its ceiling. Craig warned her, low, that pouring out mana on this scale would kill an ordinary caster. It would drain her dry. Maya told him she could pour it 3 days and 3 nights and walk home fine. She opened the flood. The 4 of them caught it and began the incantation together, their voices braiding into one word too large for the throat, and the air over the plain gathered into something that pressed on the teeth. Then the spell broke open across the whole sky. Cluster flare. It bloomed in 100 blossoms of fire at once, wall to wall across the dark, and every beating black wing in the heavens caught and burned. The swarm did not scatter. It simply ceased, thousands of them gone in a single spreading roar of light, and the night turned to noon and back again. Ash drifted down through clean air. Beautiful, isn't it? Maya said, watching it fall. Beside her, Kane agreed that it was. But when she glanced over, the eyeslits of his helm were not turned up at the burning sky at all. They were turned on her. When the light died and the sky came back blue-black and quiet, Maya braced for the part she dreaded. The soldiers had seen everything now. The giant of bone, the dead standing back up with red eyes and taking orders, their own fallen friends walking. They knew what she was, the word the church had taught the whole world to fear, and she stood there on the plain and waited for the recoil, for the raised holy symbols, for the horror she had watched cross her own family's faces 11 years ago. She had already decided, coldly, that if they gave her fear, then fear was what she would rule them with. The frontier gave her a roar instead. It went up all along the line and off the top of the city wall, hundreds of voices at once, and it took her a full second to understand it was not screaming. It was cheering. They were throwing their fists in the air. They were shouting for the hero who had come out of the dark on a giant and saved them all. Maya stood very still, thrown completely, and heard herself ask, almost stupid with it, whether she had really done anything to earn all this. Craig crossed the mud to her and went down on one knee in front of the whole army. "Because of you," he said, head bowed, monocle catching the torchlight, "we kept the people of Windsound alive tonight." He asked her to forgive his rudeness, all of it, from the cold welcome to the guest room to every hour he had treated her as the first prince's spy. He had misjudged her badly, and he was sorry. Maya, who had ridden out here fully intending to make this frontier her own by any means it took, found she had no idea what to do with an honest man kneeling in the mud to thank her. She told him, awkwardly, that it had not been her power alone. Cain came to her through the smoke, moving stiff and oddly clumsy in his plate, even now that the fighting was done. He did not thank her the way Craig had. He made a quiet, careful request instead. "Send the giant away," he asked, "and the 4 skeleton mages with it. Hide them before they reach the town. But keep the risen soldiers walking in plain sight. Let their families see them. Let the wives and the children see their men come home." Maya looked at him a moment, at the faceless helm, and the tension in him that the armor did not quite explain, and did as he asked. The town poured out to meet them. They came through the gate into a street packed wall to wall, lanterns swinging, torn paper falling like snow. And the people of Windsound did not shrink from the woman who commanded the dead. They pressed toward her. An old man caught her hand in both of his and would not let go. "You saved my grandsons out there tonight," he said, his eyes wet and shining. "Both of them. Bless you, my lady. Bless you." Maya, who did not have an answer ready for that, let him hold on. Under her breath, she asked Rachel how any of this was possible. Rachel, walking easy at her shoulder, told her she had done it. "The frontier honored strength before it honored anything else," she said. And this was a land that had always tried to keep its dead close. The little spirit dolls in every window, the old hope of calling the fallen back. Out here, the church's fear of necromancers meant almost nothing. To these people, Maya was not a monster at all. She was simply the one who had driven the monsters off. Then the crowd parted, and Maya watched the hardest part of the whole night. A woman broke through with a small boy by the hand, and both of them ran straight for Ted. He caught his son up out of habit, and Maya saw the exact instant the boy felt it. "Papa," the child said, frowning up at him, "your hand's so cold." Ted knelt down in the confetti and did not lie to them. He told his wife and his son, gently, that he had not come home whole, that he was not living anymore, not the way they were, that because of the lady he could keep standing and keep fighting for the frontier, and he was grateful for it beyond words. But he would have to dwell apart from now on, and he would not be able to come to them often. The boy did not fully understand. The wife did. She held her husband a long moment, and then she let him go, and she came and found Maya in the crowd. There were tears on her face, and no blame in it at all. "Thank you," she said simply. "You gave him the choice to go on, to keep being a man who protects us, instead of just a name we bury." She pressed Maya's cold-handed soldier's hand between her own. "Thank you, my lady." Maya stood in the swinging lantern light with the confetti coming down and the whole town cheering around her, and she did not feel like a conqueror who had just taken a frontier. She felt like something she had never planned to be and did not know how to carry yet. A hero was not a title you claimed. It was a weight people handed you, all at once, in a crowded street, whether you had wanted it or not. She had come here to rule these people through fear if she had to. Now she was going to have to think of something else. The day after she raised a giant out of the frontier's dead, Maya could not cross her own street without a hand catching her sleeve. Ted's wife reached her first. The woman took both of Maya's cold hands in her warm ones and could barely get the words out. "You gave him back to me," she said. "I got to talk to my husband tonight instead of putting him in the ground. There is no debt I could ever pay for that." Maya, who had spent most of her life being called a demon's servant, did not quite know what to do with her face. She settled for holding the woman's hands a moment longer. Then Ted's boy pushed in under his mother's arm, still gripping his father's fingers, and looked up at Maya as if reporting something important. "His hand is cold now," the child said. "That is the only thing that changed. It is still the big hand that holds mine." That was when the rest of them came. Families of every soldier she had called back out of the mud, pressing in with their thanks. And somewhere in the crowd, a name went up that would follow her the rest of the season. The immortal goddess of the frontier. Out here, where the church's reach was thin and the dead were honored, a necromancer was not a curse. She was a blessing with cold hands. The children wanted the giant. They chanted for it until Maya, against her better judgment, let the bone titan rise once over the rooftops so they could shriek and point, then folded it away before it frightened anyone with sense. Her 4 leeches took the adoration far far better than she did. They pulled handsome bodies out of her mana and waved to the crowd like returning princes. And the flamboyant one, the ice worker, peeled half his robe off his chest to a chorus of delighted screaming. Maya took off one slipper and threw it. It struck him square in the head. He kept posing anyway. By dusk, the parade wound back to the castle gates, where the servants who had once flinched from her stood waiting, and more than one of them was crying with plain relief. Maya was working out how to escape all of it when the Count found her at the foot of the stair and asked, low, if she would come to his office, alone. His office was buried alive in paper. Reports and ledgers stood in leaning towers on every surface, the whole weight of a border kept from collapse by one set of hands. You summon a lady somewhere this private, Maya said, running a finger along a stack, and a woman starts to wonder what her husband intends. The armored figure by the window did not rise to the joke. For a long moment, the Count only stood there, the closed helm giving nothing back, the way it had the night he had branded her a spy and left her to his cold household. When he spoke, the masking device bent his voice into something deeper than any man's ought to be. He apologized. He said he had treated her as an enemy's blade from the first hour, that he had been certain the prince had sent her to open his throat while he slept, and that she had spent the difference of it defending a land that owed her nothing. You have nothing to apologize for, Maya said. I would have suspected me too. He was quiet again. Then he told her he did not want to lie to the woman who had saved his people. He told her there was one word that undid everything he wore, and that no living soul had heard him say it in 2 years. Release. The armor came apart, not dramatically. It simply unlocked at every seam at once and slid off him in heavy dark pieces, ringing as it struck the floorboards, until the empty plate lay scattered like a shed skin, and there was only the person who had been inside it all along. The monster Count of the frontier was a slight young man with pink blonde hair and clear blue eyes, and he barely came up to Maya's shoulder. He was 19, a grown man of 19, the same age as the woman looking at him, and the curse that had been laid on his blood held his whole body in a slight, youthful shape that his years had never been allowed to fill. The legend that made raiders turn their horses around, the terror whispered in 3 kingdoms, was this, a young man the size of the boy he had stopped being years ago, watching her face for the disgust he was sure was coming. Maya did not flinch. She had known for days. You are not surprised, he said. His voice, his real voice, was quiet and a little rough, nothing like the machine growl. My magic reads the shape of a body through iron, she said. I knew there was a small man inside that armor the first night. My people confirmed the rest. She tilted her head. I only waited for you to tell me yourself. Something went loose in his shoulders. He sat, and so did she. And for the first time, they talked as 2 people at a table instead of a lord and the pawn he had been handed. He explained it plainly. His father had died 2 years ago, and the title had fallen on him too young and too small, in a land where a lord who looks like he can be knocked over invites every knife on the border. So he had built a monster. He wore the enchanted plate. He seeded the rumors himself. He let the frontier believe a giant killer held its wall, because a legend could hold a line his cursed body could not. He admitted the harder thing after that, looking at the desk instead of her. The family gift, the guardian vocation carried in his bloodline, the power that was supposed to shield everyone who stood near him, had never woken in him. He was a border lord who could not yet protect his own border. That was why her giant had mattered so much. You held my land when I could not, he said. I do not know how a man thanks his wife for that. You could start by not trying to send her away. Maya leaned back. I am your wife. My husband's land is mine to protect. That is not a favor. That is the arrangement. He asked her then, carefully, the question he had clearly been carrying, whether the marriage had ever been her choice at all, or whether she had been shipped to the edge of the world against her will like everything else in his life. She told him a version of the truth, that the saint and the prince in the capital had wanted her gone, and had dressed the exile up as a wedding, and thrown her out here to be forgotten. She left out the deeper thing, the other life she remembered, the fact that she knew the bones of this whole world. That secret she kept folded away. Then you did not want this either, he said. If you wish to be free of it, I will not hold you. You should get to choose your own road. Are you trying to be rid of me already? She said it lightly, and enjoyed watching him scramble to insist he was not. When he had tangled himself thoroughly, she stood, stepped behind his chair, and wrapped her arms around him in a warm, teasing hold, her chin near his hair. He went scarlet and came out of the chair like it had caught fire, backing off with both hands raised, stammering that Craig always said a warrior who lets himself grow soft in comfort never grows strong. He fled to the far window to collect himself. Maya laughed quietly, for the first time in longer than she could remember. 2 people thrown away by the world, each handed a life they never asked for. She thought she could build something here, and she thought, watching him breathe and blush and live, that it would be a genuine waste to ever turn a man this alive into one of the cold and quiet dead. Maya woke before dawn, the way she always did. She had never slept well, not since the life where she lost her family, and the dark hour before morning always found her awake. She wrapped a gown over her nightclothes and went down into the yard, where she found the Count already at work. He was swinging a heavy battle axe at Craig, and Craig was turning every blow aside as if brushing off rain. She hid herself to watch. The old swordmaster picked the young lord's technique apart between strikes. "Wasted motion," Craig said, stepping inside another swing. "Let the weight of the axe do the labor. Your father wielded it the way water falls. You fight it like an enemy." Cain went down. He got up, he charged again, went down again, got up again, and each time he rose faster than the last. He said, breathing hard, that he meant to grow strong quickly, as a warrior, as a lord, and as a man, and that he did not much care what it cost him. Then Craig caught sight of Maya in the shadow of the wall and lowered his blade, unwilling to let the lady of the house stand in the cold. The drill ended. Cain crossed the yard and laid his own jacket over her shoulders before she could refuse it, and she thanked him and told him not to go catching a chill himself. And he protested, flushing to the ears, that he was a grown man and not a child to be fussed over. Maya drew a towel out of the empty air, out of the space fold her lead lich kept, and wiped the sweat from Cain's brow herself while he stood there not knowing what to do with his hands. "Your strength is a frightening thing," she said to Craig. The swordmaster shook his head. Sword Demon was only a byname the world had hung on him, he told her. His true vocation was simpler than that. He was a butler. Then his hand went to a locket at his collar, and something old moved across his face. He said, low, that he had never truly been strong enough, that if he had been, one particular day would not have ended the way it did. He let a silence sit. Then he said, almost idle, that the maid Rachel fought with twin daggers in a style he had seen only once before, long ago, worn by a legendary assassin the world had called Ghost Ray. Maya kept her voice smooth. She said she had never learned much of Rachel's past. It was a lie, and she told it cleanly to put herself between the swordmaster and her own right hand. Craig glanced toward a dark hedge at the yard's edge and said nothing more. Maya did not have to look. Her necromancer's sense for a held still presence had already told her Rachel was standing there in the frost, unseen, guarding her mistress the way she always did. Below the fortress, the enemy's dead were laid out on stone for her to read. Maya and Rachel bent over the wolf things that had come out of the forest, the eyeless carcasses ringed with too many small mouths. Ruined undead usually crumbled to dust, which made an intact one rare evidence, and Maya went through it the way a rival craftsman goes through another's work. These were not born wild, she said, turning a stiff limb. This flesh was stitched together by hand. Someone made them, a necromancer, and a human one. She did not think much of him. She named the flaws aloud, contemptuous. Too many crude modifications piled on until the shape drifted too far from anything living to control well, and insects worked into the raw material like a beginner reaching for numbers. Strong feeling is what makes a strong undead, she said. Grief, devotion, an unfinished purpose. That is the fuel. Insects barely feel at all. You can pour a mountain of mana into a beetle and still raise nothing worth fearing. Whoever built these was never properly taught. Rachel offered to carry the finding to the Count through Craig. Maya said she would simply tell Cain herself. It was a small thing, but Rachel's face fell for half a breath, and she bumped her forehead lightly against the stone wall, and that tiny slip told Maya everything the maid had been hiding. You wanted a reason to see him, Maya said softly. Craig. Rachel was quiet. Then, shyly, she told it. In her spy days, the sword demon had found her surrounded and bleeding out. A wilder man then than the butler he had become, though his blade had already been a beautiful thing. He had lent her his shoulder and carried her out when she was covered in her own blood, and she had loved him from that day to this one. Maya reached out and pressed the maid's cold hand. She promised that in time she could remake more of Rachel's constructed body, enough that she might one day live and love as fully as any woman living. Rachel thanked her, and then, because she was honest even when it hurt, she said the last of it, that it would likely come to nothing, that Craig's heart still belonged to a woman 2 years dead, the Lady Fiona, Cain's own mother, and that a living rival was one thing, but a ghost was another. 3 days later, the Count took her out into the market, in plain commoner clothes that fooled nobody, since the cloth was too fine, and Maya's glasses caught and threw back the sun like nothing a farmhand ever wore. Rachel trailed them somewhere in the crowd, unseen, careful not to spoil the day. day. He called it a date and then went red at his own word and admitted the outing was meant as an apology for how coldly he had treated her at the start. A vegetable seller named Sheena hailed him warmly by an old familiar name, the way a woman greets a boy she has watched grow up, and asked if he was out walking with his wife. "The new road has been a gift," she told him. "Trade is up since it opened. Your father would be pleased." Cain thanked her, asked after her stall, and then, quietly, reminded her to keep feeding the monster tail to any outsider who passed through. So the frontier stayed feared from the outside in. The locals knew the real man. Only strangers needed the legend. Maya watched him work his own myth like a strategist moving a piece, and thought privately that it was a shame the curse held him small, when the portraits of his father showed a strikingly handsome man he had never been allowed to become. They bought sandwiches from a stall where a whole ox turned on a spit, the meat carved off in ribbons and folded into bread with greens. Cain paid in silver and waved off the change. Halfway through his, half in jest, he asked whether she could raise the roast ox as one of her undead. He was smiling when he said it. Maya answered gently, the way you answer a question that is not really about what it asks. "I can only raise the dead whose souls still linger in this world," she said. "Once a soul has passed on, it is beyond me. There has to be something left to call back." His smile went, and she understood he had never been asking about an ox. He had been asking about two people, dead 2 years, whose souls were long gone. She let the silence be kind and did not press it. Maya ate the rest of hers plainly, like any commoner in the square, and Cain noted with a soft laugh how easily a highborn lady set her manners down. She thought about her own long road as she chewed, the powder that would one day make her undead so she could rejoin the family she had lost, and how a small, warm thing like this meal was exactly what that choice would cost her. Then she folded the thought away and reaffirmed it anyway, the way she always did. Her eye caught on it across the last row of stalls, and everything warm in her went still. It sat on a cheap cloth among trinkets and old buckles, as if it were worth nothing, a brooch shaped from a bull's skull, small and dull and wrong. To any other buyer, it was ugly costume metal. To a necromancer, it was a sun with the light turned inside out. Maya knew it on sight, from the buried knowledge of this world she carried and told no one. The Demon King's emblem. Power came off it in a slow, cold tide, enormous and patient and dangerous. The kind of thing that should never be lying under a clear sky in a market where children ran. A relic like this did not end up on a junk cloth by accident. It was a trap set for someone, or a treasure someone had lost, and either way, it had been waiting. She should have walked past it. She bought it instead. Cain frowned at the ugly thing and asked if she really wanted it. She only said that it was more than it looked, and pinned it to her collar there in the street. The moment it touched her, it began to feed. A thin, steady pull opened somewhere under her ribs, drawing her strength off into the skull like water finding a crack. Patient, endless, cold. Any sane craftsman would have torn it off and thrown it in the nearest well. Maya left it where it was. She did not fully understand yet what it was doing to her, only that it was doing something, and that whatever it was, she meant to learn it from the inside. The emblem drank quietly at her collar as they walked back into the sunlight, and she let it. The town cheered her name a little way off. Her husband walked flustered and alive at her side, and a dead thing rode on her chest, taking a small measure of her with every step, kept there entirely by her own choice. By the time they reached the fountain, the thing pinned at Maya's collar had drunk enough of her that the whole square tilted. She had known the emblem would cost her. She had not expected the cost to arrive all at once, a cold weight pouring down through her like water, finding the lowest ground. She sat before her knees could decide the matter for her. Cain was at her side in an instant, all the color gone out of his face. He begged her to let him take the brooch off, to let him carry her home, and then remembered, in the same breath, that the curse had left him too slight to carry anyone, and the shame of it flickered behind his worry. She told him she was fine. She was not, quite, but she had no intention of ending a good day slumped on a bench, looking pitiful. He went to fetch her something to drink. "Don't move," he said, pointing at her as though the order might hold her in place. "I mean it." She lifted 2 fingers in a lazy promise and watched him go. The man arrived the moment Cain was out of sight. He came out of the crowd smelling of roses, an expensive, deliberate cloud of them, the kind a person wore to be remembered, bespectacled, hazel-eyed, dressed in embroidered finery, far too fine for a frontier market. He bent toward her with smooth concern, remarking that so lovely a lady looked unwell, and might he be of some small help. Under the roses, Maya smelled it. Faint, sweetish, unmistakable to anyone who had spent a lifetime among the dead. the reek of decay tucked beneath the perfume like a knife under a coat. She looked up at him over the rims of her glasses and told him, pleasantly, that she was here with her husband and that he could carry his concern elsewhere. Something behind his eyes noted the coldness and filed it away. He straightened, unhurried, and did not leave. The fountain burst. Something heaved up out of the water, a mass of gray jelly the size of a cart, spitting a spray of acid that hissed and pitted the stone where it landed. The crowd came apart screaming. A tentacle of the stuff shot out, wrapped a small girl around the waist, and hauled her up squirming into the air. Maya was on her feet. The drain made the world swim, but she had put down far worse things than this on far worse days. The merchant told her to run. He granted quickly that she looked a capable mage. But with a child in the creature's grip, surely there was nothing to be done. He seemed genuinely to expect her to flee. Maya smiled. Rachel was already moving. She dropped out of a rooftop shadow like a thrown blade, twin daggers flashing, and sheared the tentacle through in 2 clean strokes. The girl fell. Cain caught her out of the air, folded her against his chest, and set her down, running toward her mother's voice. That left the slime, rearing and blind and furious. Maya raised one hand and reached, not into the square, but through it, into the void space where her dead waited. Cold poured down her arm. Lysander answered from a great distance, his spell spoken in that flat, unbothered voice, and a lattice of white frost bloomed across the creature from the ground up. In the space of a breath, it stood frozen solid, a gray statue steaming in the sun. The crowd did not scream now. They cheered. The name the frontier had already begun to give her went through the square like fire through dry grass. The immortal goddess. The merchant stepped closer through the noise. He named himself Oswald Osborne of the Osborne Trading Company and praised the freezing as though he had understood exactly what he had seen. He had glimpsed the lich's arm for less than a heartbeat, and from that alone, he had read her for a necromancer. Maya marked it and said nothing of it. He offered her a rose, a rare purple one, he said, its meaning eternally beautiful, a fitting gift for the princess of the dead. Maya tossed it up without looking. The cold still lingering on the air caught the flower midair and shattered it to red dust. She had no interest in flowers, she told him, and turned her shoulder to him. Behind her, Cain arrived scowling at the merchant's back. She teased him for the jealousy before he could deny it. He denied it anyway, which only proved her point. The emblem laid her low for a full week. She wore it the whole time, to bed, to the bath, through every hour of the fever weakness it poured into her, and she would not hear one word about taking it off. Cain argued. She let him argue. When the week was out, she rose from it entirely recovered, the skull still riding at her collar, and the 4 leashes drifted grinning into the garden to marvel that a girl of 18 was somehow still growing. Cain wondered aloud what part of her was growing. Her height? He said it hopefully, then went a little quiet, thinking of his own frame and his father's, and the curse standing between the two. Maya did not answer the question. She had a use for the morning instead. The attacks were not finished, she told him. The wolves, the beetle swarm, now the slime in the fountain, all of one hand and all still coming. A frontier that leaned on the capital for its swords would fall the first time the capital chose to send none, so the frontier would stop leaning. She opened the void space and called them out. The dwarves came first, stocky, horned, bushy-bearded, pale but sound, with none of the grave about them. In life they had been master smiths, and death had only sharpened the devotion. They would go down into Windsound's forges, she said, and teach the living everything the living had let itself forget. Cain hesitated. He asked carefully whether working the dead this way was truly any different from the way the kingdom had once ground its craftsmen down to nothing. The dwarves rounded on him before Maya could speak. One of them jabbed a thick finger up at the count and growled that they forged for their lady by their own free choice, that she had given them tireless bodies and the one thing the living world never had, the chance to work their craft forever. They would not be spoken of in the same breath as the kingdom's masters. Cain lifted both hands and let it go. 2 more answered the call. Godfrey came carrying his own head in the crook of one arm and a great sword balanced one-handed in the other, and asked eagerly whether it was finally his turn. Rue hopped up beside him, a warding slip on her brow, and swore to go through fire and water for Maya, then told Godfrey to hush, since a little flame could not touch her through her lady's magic. The 2 of them bickered like that the whole way down into the deep dungeons, sent to strip the dark floors of their ore and their monsters. A month turned the frontier into something the maps had no word for. From the rampart at dusk, Maya could watch it happen. The forge quarter below her never went dark now. Furnace after furnace burning down the length of the river, the dwarves' lost arts poured into the hands of every living smith who would take them. The work coming off those anvils was no longer frontier work. Ravenmarch steel had passed the royal capital's finest, blade for blade. Merchants carried it east to the great cities and came back with their purses fat, and the name of a death-cursed backwater began to travel on the strength of what it made. It was not only steel. She had sent the 4 liches out to teach, one to the Adventurers Guild, one to the Magic School, one to the Frontier Army, each of them a sorcerer greater than anything the kingdom kept, handing down knowledge the living had no other way to buy. The garrison drilled sharper by the week. The young mages woke up to what they were, and the dead kept climbing back out of the earth with their arms full. Godfrey came booming onto the rampart to report his haul, orichalcum and adamantite dragged up from the deep southern floors, or the capital's miners would kill for and never reach. Rue landed beside him with a rare pale metal and a magic crystal the size of a man's head, and could not resist adding that hers was the better find. They set the treasure down at Maya's feet, the way cats lay their kills at a door. She looked out over all of it, the burning forges, the fattening trade, the deep-hauled ore heaped on her own stones. A whole economy of the dead, rising in a place the kingdom had thrown away as fit for nothing. She turned it over, new armor for Cain from the dwarf forges, fresh daggers for Rachel, a proper blade for Craig at last. The exile the crown had discarded now outmade the throne that discarded her, and not one soul down in that capital had yet understood it. She let herself enjoy the moment. She had earned it. The merchant came back with the spring. Maya let him come. She could have had him stopped at the gate. Rachel was tucked in the greenery a few steps off, and would have opened his throat at a single word. But a man who reeked of death beneath his roses was more useful watched than turned away. He settled across the tea table as though he had been invited, and made his report like the honest tradesman he pretended to be. His company had been selling the border count fertilizer, he said, for the memorial flowers Cain was coaxing up on a hillside grave. Then, lightly, as though it were one more scrap of small talk, he passed on the warning he had plainly come to deliver. The saint meant to march on the frontier. She had begun telling anyone who would listen that she would come here and slay the evil nesting in it, and everyone knew well enough whose name the word evil was standing in for. Maya sipped her tea and thanked him for the trouble, unbothered. If the saint or the crown chose to meddle now, she remarked, it might not end as gently for them as it had the last time. She said it the way another woman might remark on the weather. Oswald laughed, called her a terrifying woman, and allowed that the terror only drew him in further. He left another of his purple roses on the table. When he rose to go, petals scattered from him across the stone in a small deliberate flourish, a plant mage showing off. And through the roses, still, that same thin thread of rot. Maya watched the garden gate a while after it had closed behind him. She summoned Eloise the moment she was alone. The vampire came unfolding out of the shadow of the trellis, silver hair, red eyes, a lazy show of fang, the true vampire queen, and never for a heartbeat willing to let anyone forget it. Maya gave her the work plainly. Eloise was to slip into the royal palace, sink her thralls into the people who mattered, and quietly foul whatever move the crown decided to make against the frontier. Eloise draped herself across a chair and considered it. If she did the thing well, she wondered aloud, might she have a taste of the count's blood as her reward? No, Maya said. The vampire pouted, wheedled, hinted that a queen ought to be paid in something finer than orders. Maya did not raise her voice. She simply closed her hand around the tether of mana that kept Eloise standing, and let a little of it go. The red eyes widened as the power began to thin out of her. It took only that. Eloise straightened fast, all the languor gone, and agreed the mission suited her splendidly after all. Greed, Maya told her flatly, was a thing she would learn to curb. Maya held out the merchant's rose. The instant it touched the true queen's fingers, it withered to a black curl of nothing, the borrowed name crumbling before the real one. Eloise smiled at that, pleased, and was gone toward the capital to bend its court to Maya's will, one throat at a time. The forges burned on below. Somewhere to the west, the saint was gathering herself to come, and Maya, a dead thing drinking quietly at her collar, kept there by her own choice, found she was almost looking forward to it. The saint had come west to purge a nest of evil, and the nest turned out to have paved streets. The carriage with the church's crest rolled in through the outer gate and stopped, and the golden-haired woman who climbed down from it stood there blinking at the noise of a city that would not stop working to look at her. She had expected a ruined backwater. Instead, there were full stalls and fat merchants and soldiers who moved like they had killed things, and not one banner raised to welcome her. She said as much, loudly, that the road had been unbearable, that a border county was supposed to be a wasteland, and that it was simply no fun watching the villainess she had thrown away land in a wealthy marriage instead of a ditch. Sir Aldrich answered her plainly. This march sat on the national border. It grew rich on foreign trade and fielded a hardened army, and its count carried the real weight of a marquis, whatever the lesser title said. She would find no frightened flock here. That only soured her further. She jerked her chin at a knot of laborers who had not bowed and told him to go teach the rude ones some manners, to remind the frontier what the church's authority looked like. He did not move. These people had spent their whole lives fighting monsters, he told her. They would not be cowed by a raised hand, and he would not raise one at civilians on her whim. Behind his courtesy, Aldrich was doing sums he did not say aloud. He had escorted a saint. What he had gotten was a spoiled girl who mistook a title for a spine, and every day of the ride west had peeled a little more guilt off her. Kiara shrugged the disapproval off the way she shrugged off everything that did not fit her story. Her power would deliver the ending she was owed. It always did. She would go straight to the border count, tell him the wife warming his bed was a necromancer, and watch him throw the woman out himself. Aldrich warned her that arriving at a noble's seat unannounced was an insult that could get them turned away, or worse. She talked over him. She was the saint. She was the first prince's betrothed. Doors opened for her whether the man behind them liked it or not. High on a rooftop, a single crow sat watching them, its eyes the wrong color, a wet, blood-red no-crow war. When Kiara turned toward the castle on the hill, the bird lifted off and flew the same way, low and quiet, toward Windsound Castle. At the castle door, they were braced for a fight, and instead an aging butler in black simply bowed them inside. Kiara took that for proof of her own charm. She did not notice how the air changed as she crossed the threshold, a killing cold pressing down from the shadows near the chandelier, the flat attention of something that wanted very much to be told yes. She kept her chin up and pretended her hands were steady. The butler seated them and withdrew to fetch his lord. Kiara sprawled across a long sofa like she owned it and lounged there rehearsing her triumph until the far doors opened. The count came in. He was enormous, plated head to foot in dark war armor, a closed helm where a face should be. When he named himself the lord who governed the frontier, his voice rolled out too deep and too even, bent through some device inside the metal. Kiara wasted no time. She pointed and announced that his wife, Maya, was a necromancer, a woman who commanded the filthy dead, and he had married her without knowing it. The armored lord did not rage. He laughed. He remarked mildly that he knew nothing at all about the undead. Had the good saint ever truly seen one up close? He wondered. Did she even know what she was looking at? Then he reached up with both gauntlets, took hold of his own helmed head, and lifted it clean off his shoulders. There was no neck under it, no stump, no blood, nothing, just empty air above the breastplate, and the head held out at arm's length in one steel hand, the helm turning to face her as if to ask whether this was the sort of thing she had meant. Kiara screamed and threw herself behind Aldrich. Aldrich drew the holy sword. It was the real thing, the church's sacred blade, forged with holy formulas that made it death to any ordinary corpse thing. And he brought it up level and named the headless lord a false master he would cut down where he stood. He never finished the swing. The corpse girl Rue came out of the shadows in a blur, there and inside his reach before anyone saw her move. Her weapon met the holy sword once. The sacred blade broke. It did not chip or bend. It shattered, the way ice shatters. A bright hard crack, and then bright shards spinning out across the polished floor and skidding into the corners. And the hilt in Aldrich's fist ended in a stub of jagged metal that still hummed faintly with a holiness that had nowhere left to go. Rue landed light on her feet and clicked her tongue at the headless knight for being slow, for making her step in and do his work. And the great sword knight rumbled that she had stolen his prey. Kiara did the only thing left in her. She flung her holy purging magic at the dead. The first cast washed off the corpse girl like water off stone. Nothing. Not a flinch. Not a wisp of smoke. Not the faintest recoil that holy fire is supposed to tear out of the walking dead. She cast it again, higher and shriller, all her weight behind it, and again it guttered and died a pace short of anything, spent for nothing. A third time, and the third emptied her. She stood swaying with her thin little pool of power gone dry, and her sacred fire refusing, simply refusing, to matter here. That was when the woman walked in. Black dress, black hair loose, round glasses catching the gray light, a small dull brooch pinned at her collar that seemed to drink the room's warmth toward itself. She had been there the whole time, she said, and asked, not unkindly, whether the saint had truly not noticed. Then she told her why nothing worked. Shall I tell you why your fire keeps dying? Because everything in this hall is protected by my magic. My dead don't burn for your goddess. Kiara's face came apart as she placed her. This was the necromancer, the same one who had broken her once already, months ago, in the capital, in front of everyone who mattered, the one nightmare her remembered story had never contained. Maya lifted one hand, and the shadows behind her stood up. 4 of them came through a seam in the empty air, robed and skeletal and crowned in old gold, and the reception hall filled edge to edge with a dark, patient power that had no interest in mercy. One of the 4 looked at Sir Aldrich. That was all. The holy knight seemed to sag where he stood, the fight running out of him like sand, and then he folded down and came apart into a loose heap of pale bones on the floor. Kiara shook the bones. She said his name. She got a rattle of clean, dry bone for an answer, and something in her simply switched off. Her eyes rolled up, and she dropped in a graceless faint across her escort's remains, out cold before she hit the stone. Maya watched her lie there and felt none of the things a kinder woman might have felt. She had waited 11 years for a moment like this one. She could stand to wait a little more for the rest of it. She woke on a bench by the fountain in the middle of the town square with no memory of how she had gotten there. Her hair had come down, her white and gold robes rumpled and dusty from the castle floor. A townswoman pressed a damp towel into her hands and asked, kindly enough, whether the poor thing was ill, and a small crowd drifted in around the bench, curious to see what the strange fine lady would do next. Kiara saw an audience, the one thing that had never failed her. She lurched up onto the bench and gave them her voice. They were all being deceived, she cried. The woman in that castle, the count's own wife, was a necromancer who commanded rotting corpses. The true count was already dead, murdered, hollowed out, raised as a headless monster to wear his title. She had seen it with her own eyes. She was the saint, sent by the Holy Church to save them, and they had to rise up now before the witch made a kingdom of the dead out of their bones. She stopped, chest heaving, and waited for the fear, the gasps, the turn. It did not come. A big man near the front folded his arms and looked at her the way you look at a child telling you water is wet. We know. Everybody here knows Lady Maya is a necromancer. What of it? We knew before you got off your carriage, a woman beside him added, flat. Kiara's mouth opened. She tried again, louder, that they did not understand, that necromancy was an abomination, that the dead were filth and the woman who raised them was damned. An old man pushed forward out of the crowd, and he was not shaking with fear. He was shaking with anger. You want to watch your mouth about her. That woman gave me my grandsons back. The wolves came out of the forest and my boys went down on the wall, both of them, and she stood them back up, and they're eating supper at my table tonight. You come here in your gold and call her filth? A townswoman stepped in beside him, her voice cracking but not stopping. She raised my husband. He fell and she raised him and he came home. He is cold now and he lives apart and he is still my Ted and he is alive because of her. Say another word about her. I dare you. It was catching, the way a fire catches. A dockhand said the immortal goddess had rebuilt his whole street after the Beatles came. A young mother said her children slept safe now for the first time in her life, and the frontier had never once slept safe before the black-haired lady came west. The crowd thickened and hardened and turned, all of it, every face, and none of it turned the way Kiara had spent her whole gilded life expecting a crowd to turn. The capital can keep its holy words, the big man said over the noise, and the square took it up. We keep her. They closed on the bench, not to touch her, only to loom. A wall of frontier faces telling the saint of the Holy Church to her face that she had come to the wrong town to slander the one person they would never give up. Kiara shrank down into her ruined robes with the towel still clutched in her hands, small and golden and alone in the middle of 100 people who all knew exactly what Maya was and loved her for it anyway. It was the first real bite out of the debt the title had promised. Not the end of her. No judgment, no sentence, no fall. Just the first public crack in a woman who had built her whole life on being believed. At the very edge of the square, leaning against a wall where the crowd thinned, stood a slight young man with pink blonde hair and clear blue eyes, watching the whole thing with a small private smile. It was Kane, out of his armor, the real count, the man the saint had never once been allowed to see. She had come all this way to purge the frontier of him and would not have known him if she tripped over him. He watched his people close ranks around his wife's name, and when the noise was at its worst, he pushed off the wall and murmured to no one that it truly was a frightening story. Cain peeled her out of the crowd before it could get uglier, and Kiara, drowning, grabbed the only hand offered. He was charming and soft-spoken and seemed to know everyone, and she read that as influence and let him lead her wherever he liked. Some townsfolk started to speak when they saw him, then went oddly quiet, ducking their heads. One or two coughed into their fists and turned away, shoulders shaking. Kiara took the shaking for her curse settling over the town, more proof she was right. She never once considered they were swallowing laughter. He brought her to a ruin, a sagging little church branch with half its roof gone, which she seized on at once as evidence. See how the wicked count had let the goddess's house rot. A flustered priest hurried out to meet them, started to greet the youth with some grand title, and caught the boy's small flat look and swallowed it whole, settling instead for a stammered welcome to the honored saint. When Kiara raged that the count clearly oppressed the church, the priest only shifted his feet and admitted, awkwardly, that his lordship had in fact been the one quietly paying to keep the branch standing at all. She did not want to hear it. She announced grandly that she would lodge here now and lead a proper campaign, street speeches by day, and when the town was hers, an assault on the castle to burn the witch out. The priest looked ill. The youth only nodded along, agreeable as anything, and murmured something at the priest's ear that Kiara did not catch, that the branch's coin should be tripled, and the saint kept very comfortable and left exactly where she was. She thought she had found an ally and a base. She had walked into a cage with the door held open for her and thanked the boy who held it. Maya watched the whole small comedy from the shadows of a colonnade. Rachel, a silent blade's length at her shoulder. The maid could not understand it. Her mistress had 100 cleaner ways to end a foolish, powerless saint, and here she was, letting the woman set up shop. Would her lady truly not be rid of her? Rachel asked, low. Would it not at least be tidier to drive her clean out of the county? No, Maya said, and watched the golden speck of the saint disappear into the ruin. Kill her, and the church doesn't lose a saint. It gets a new one, she explained it. The saint vocation was one of a kind, only ever one alive in the whole world, and the last had to die for this one to inherit. Put Kiara in the ground and the power would jump to some stranger, and the next saint might be clever, or strong, or genuinely able to hurt a necromancer. All the things this one so gloriously was not. A known fool, humbled and penned and watched, was worth 10 times an unknown threat. There was more to it than strategy, and they both knew it. In another life, on a route Maya still remembered too clearly, this exact girl's lies had walked a different villainess up onto a scaffold and cheered while the blade came down. This, the ruined church, the tripled coin, the woman left alive to flail and fail and be laughed at by broom-wielding grandmothers for the rest of her days. This was the answer to that. Call it revenge, Maya said, turning to go. A small one. Consider the debt settled for the girl who once went to the block. Rachel followed her mistress out into the dark and did not ask again. Sir Aldrich was not a heap of bones, and never had been. He met them in the torchlit yard, whole and standing, a little pale around the edges of a thing he had watched happen to himself. The collapse in the hall had been an illusion, one of the 4 grave mages painting despair and ruin across his eyes until he believed it and folded, and then letting him wake to find every bone accounted for. He should have been furious. He mostly looked relieved, the way a man looks when a weight he has carried too long is finally, quietly set down. He did not go back to Kiara. He did not go back to the church at all. He said only that his oath had been sworn to virtue once, and that he had watched that oath and the woman he served pull apart. And today, in that hall, they had come all the way apart. He was done. He asked plainly to serve something real. Maya considered the holy night for a long moment, then had a blade brought out. It was dwarf-forged black steel, the work of the dead smiths, a weapon to replace the sacred sword that lay in bright shards on her reception floor. She put it in his hands and told him the frontier could use a man who knew which way virtue ran. He took it like a drowning man taking a rope, turning it in the torchlight, absurdly moved by the honest weight of it. He did not yet know about the headless knight who ran the frontier's drills, or what Godfrey's idea of morning training looked like. Maya let him have the night. He would learn about the mornings soon enough. A month of speeches got the saint precisely nothing. She stood on her corners day after day and told the same tale. the murdered count, the monster in his armor, the witch raising a kingdom of the dead, and the frontier walked past her the way you walk past a leaky gutter. The lie that would have lit a torch mob in the capital could not find one dry thing to catch on out here, because gratitude does not burn. On the worst of those afternoons, an old woman came at her with a broom. She was small and bent and absolutely furious, one of Maya's fiercest, and she swung the broom handle at the saint's fine shoulders and swore before the goddess and everyone that she would forgive no living soul who spoke ill of Lady Maya. Kiara yelped that she was the saint recognized by the Holy Church, that this was assault, that it hurt, that not even her own father had ever struck her, and picked up her ruined skirts and ran. A golden bird flapping down the street with a grandmother and a broom at her heels and half the market laughing. While the saint chased her own tail through the streets, other visitors kept climbing the castle hill. The merchant came again that afternoon, as he had been coming for weeks, the poised young man in his cloud of rose perfume, all easy smiles behind his spectacles. He laid a set of enchanted storage bags across the low table and made his smooth case for why a great house could not do without them. Maya declined without much interest. Her own spatial magic swallowed anything she pleased into the space between spaces. A clever bag was a toy to her. She thanked him and did not take it, and kept him, as she kept him every time, at arm's length and one step outside the door of anything that mattered. Under the roses, there was always that other smell, faint and wrong, that no honest merchant should carry. She let him bow himself out, thinking he had charmed her, and filed the smell away with everything else she was not ready to move on yet. Across the room, Kane watched the whole exchange with a face like a kicked kettle. He waited until the door had shut on the perfume before he let it out, prickly and not quite meeting her eye. "He comes an awful lot," the count said, turning his teacup around and around. "For a man who never sells you anything." "He never will," Maya said. "You smile at him." She let the corner of her mouth go up and leaned in close enough to watch the tips of his ears go red, and needled him low about how a great house did need an heir eventually, and what a solemn duty that would be for the two of them, and however would they manage. Kane went the color of the sunset outside and could not find a single word, and for a moment the jealous kettle was just a flustered young man of 19, and Maya found, not for the first time lately, that she liked him better than she had ever planned to. The teasing burned itself out and left something softer behind, and Kane's face went from red to somewhere far away. He was quiet for a while, turning the cold cup. Then he leaned his slight frame into her side, the way a much younger boy might, and let his head rest against her. "You're warm," he said. His voice had dropped. "My father and mother used to hold me just like this, when I was small, really small, before the curse, before any of it." His hand tightened in the fabric of her sleeve. "It was a long time ago. 2 years feels like a long time. 2 years since a poison dragon had come down on the frontier and taken the lord and the lady both, and left their cursed son alone inside a suit of armor and a monstrous name." Maya knew the shape of that grief better than he guessed. She had lost a whole family herself once, in a life she had told no one about, and worked herself to nothing in the empty apartment after. She put her arms around the small of his back and held on, and for a breath, the two of them were just two people who had each been left behind, sitting in the gold light saying nothing. When he spoke again, his voice had steadied into something almost shy. "There's a place," Kane said. "Somewhere I've never shown anyone. You can only really see it after dark." He pulled back just enough to look up at her, earnest and open in a way the monster count never let anyone see. "Come with me tonight, please. I want you to see it." Maya said yes. She did not ask what it was. Some invitations you simply accept. She made the food herself, which scandalized her entire household. She waved off the undead cooks, and the living ones both, rolled her sleeves, and put together a proper night picnic with her own 2 hands. No magic, no dead servants, just a knife, a board, and a basket filling with food fit to eat under stars. Rachel hovered at her elbow, half sulking at being shut out, marveling that her terrible sorceress of a mistress could cook at all. "Won't you let me help, my lady?" the maid tried, pouting. Maya nudged her off with an elbow. Rachel watched a moment longer, then tilted her head and floated the darker idea, light as anything, that if her lady truly meant to master the young count, there was always the zombie powder, and would it not be quicker just to make him one of theirs? "No," Maya said, and it was almost fond. She did not want a maid thing. She wanted the flustered, grieving, honest young man exactly as he was, which was itself a fact she was still getting used to. She worked and she thought the way she always thought when her hands were busy. In her old world, she had been a woman with no time and no taste for any of this. A sibling had once pushed a silly romance game on her, and she had never even finished it. She had come into this life meaning to use the marriage, use the frontier, use every piece on the board toward getting home. Somewhere along the way, the game had turned into something she did not want to win too fast. This, she murmured, packing the last of it away, is turning into a rather fun game. Rachel asked where a countess had ever learned to cook like a common wife. Maya paused over the basket, and something old and quiet moved behind the glasses. My true homeland, she said. Perhaps one day I'll tell you about it, Rachel. Then she took up the basket and went to find Cain, out into the dark and toward the place he had never shown a living soul. A place, though neither of them said it yet, where his mother and father were buried. The emblem drank quietly at her collar as she walked, patient as ever. Whatever waited under the stars, she went to it warm and unhurried, and for once not thinking about revenge at all. The place he had never shown a living soul was a field of flowers that glowed. Cain led her up the last of the slope by the hand, and the blue came up out of the dark to meet them. Thousands of blossoms shaped like spider lilies, each one lit from inside, so the whole hill looked like a piece of the night sky that had settled to the ground. At the top stood a single grave under a plain stone. Maya had expected grief to have a heavier house than this. It only had the flowers. My mother loved them, Cain said. He crouched and spread a cloth on the grass beside the stone. She said if you have to be buried somewhere, it may as well be somewhere pretty. Maya set out the food she had made with her own hands. It was a frontier custom, he had told her on the ride out. You ate and drank at the graves of your dead, as if they were still at the table. So she poured and she portioned, and she watched a grown man of 19 sit small against the headstone of his parents and eat a meal she had cooked and call it the best thing he had tasted since they died. 2 years, he said, when she asked. He turned a piece of bread over without eating it. They went out to the great forest and they did not come back. Craig brought them home. After that, the armor went on, and it mostly stayed on. He smiled at her, tired and open. You are the first person I have brought here. I wanted you to see where I keep them. She could have said something kind. She was not good at kind, and he did not seem to need it. So she asked him the only thing she had to offer instead. My lord, she kept her voice even, the way you keep a candle even in wind. Would you want to meet them again? I can do that. It is what I am. He was quiet a while. Then he shook his head. No, they fought more than enough for one life. Let them rest. He looked at the stone with a love that had made its peace with never being answered. That is all I want for them. Rest. It was, Maya thought, the wiser answer. It was the answer she had never been able to give her own dead. She reached her senses down into the earth beneath the flowers, the way she always did near a grave, an old reflex, a courtesy paid to whatever slept below, and found nothing there. No bones, no ash, no quiet weight of two people who had earned their sleep. The soil under the stone was empty as a robbed purse. Her hand went still over the cloth. Cain, she said. He heard the change in her. He always heard it. What is it? There is no trace of your parents beneath this grave. She was already turning, already on her feet, the tenderness burning off her like frost off a blade. Their bodies are gone. Someone took them. Behind them, a voice said Cain's name. It said it in two voices at once, a man's and a woman's, laid over each other so they slid in and out of true, and both of them wrong, pitched like tenderness but hollowed out, the way a bell sounds when the metal has cracked. Maya turned all the way around, and the thing that had spoken was standing among the flowers, where nothing had been a breath before. It wore two faces. It had made itself a body to hang them on, and over that body, it had set the face of a man and the face of a woman side by side, and the faces were the faces from the miniature Cain kept in his office, his father, his mother, except that no living muscle had ever moved a face into the shapes these were making. They smiled with too much of the mouth. They looked at Cain with a fondness that had been copied by something that did not understand what fondness was for. It was not gore. There was no blood in it at all. That was the worst of it. That a thing so wrong could be so clean, could stand there in a field of glowing flowers, wearing his mother's gentle eyes, and get them almost right. The mother's mouth opened, and the father's opened with it, and in their doubled and stolen voices, the thing called Cain its beloved son. It told him it had missed him. It told him, sweetly, patiently, that he was meant to be with them, that he need only lie down and stop his heart, and that person would raise him up as it had raised them, and then the three of them could be a family again, together, forever, never parting. Cain did not move. Maya could see the boy in the man now, could see the exact instant his face broke open at the sound of his mother saying, "Come and die." The abomination lifted one arm, almost lazily, almost lovingly, and struck. It moved faster than a made thing had any right to. The blow came down between the two of them, close enough that Maya felt the wind of it split her hair, and it hit the gravestone, and the gravestone cracked from crown to base with a sound like a spine breaking. Flower light shivered across the whole hill. The thing drew its arm back and folded both hands, patient again, and waited, wearing their smiles, for Cain to understand that it could kill him whenever it liked, and chose instead to ask. It is a necromancer's work. Maya put herself half a step in front of Cain without taking her eyes off it. A rogue. Someone tore two souls that never wanted to come back into a shape and stitched them here to hurt you. Her voice had gone very quiet and very cold. This is not your mother. This is not your father. There is nothing of them in it. Do you understand me? Nothing. Maya reached for it the way she reached for any dead thing, with the command that made corpses hers. It slid off. A skin of golden light flexed around the abomination and threw her hold back into her teeth. She knew that light. She had felt its like exactly twice before, and both times it had belonged to people who were trying to keep someone alive. A shield, she said, half to herself, tasting how vile it was. 2 shields, his guard and her wall. She had heard enough of Cain's parents by now to know them by their gifts. The father who could stand in front of anyone and be a wall for them. The mother whose barriers had sealed worse things than this. Some rogue had reached into what they were and turned even that against their son. How graceless, Maya breathed. It was the worst word she owned. She swept the field with everything she had and found only fog, a faint necromantic haze breathed out by every flower on the hill, laid down on purpose, thick enough that the one who had done this could be standing 10 paces off and she would never fix on them. Her anger had nowhere to go. She could break the shield or she could seize the thing, the two workings pulling opposite ways. She could not do both at once. Maya, Cain's voice had changed. She looked, and the tears were still on his face, but under them, something had gone hard and clean as the stone before it cracked. Can your mages break that shield? Yes. Then break it. He was already on his feet. I will put my mother and father back in the ground myself, with my own hands. Not you, me. He held one of those hands out into the empty air. Give me the axe. She could have argued. She had a dozen safer ways to end this, and one of them hung cold and hidden at her collar, a trump she had told no one she carried, and for half a heartbeat she weighed it. Then she looked at his face and put it away. Some things a person has to do himself, or they never heal at all. She called Zoran out of the fold of space where she kept him, and the Lich's dry will brushed hers, and out of nothing, the old axe dropped into Cain's waiting grip. The heavy family blade his father had carried, generations of it, too big by half for the slight frame the curse had left him. He took its weight like it was nothing. He had always been stronger than he looked. Now, Tobias. Maya did not raise her voice. The second lich unfolded beside her and threw open one skeletal hand, and the dispel came off it like a held breath let go. Both shields shattered at once, the guard and the wall, the father's and the mother's, blown out into sparks that guttered and died in the flowers. The abomination spread its arms wide. In its 2 stolen voices, it asked why he would raise a blade against them, and it opened itself to him as if for an embrace, as if all he had to do was walk into it and be one with them at last. Cain went to meet it, but he did not lower the axe. Become one, he said, and his voice cracked and held. How could anyone become one with anyone? People hold each other because they are two, because there is a you and a me, and we reach across it. That is the whole of it. That is what my father would have told you. That is what my mother taught me before she taught me anything else. He set his feet. You don't know that, so you were never them. He struck once. It was clean, and it was quick, and Maya made herself watch every part of it because he should not be the only one who did. The stolen faces came apart without a cry. The whole wrong shape unknotted in the air and went to black mist, and the mist thinned, and the wind off the hill took it, and then there was only the field, and the broken stone, and a young man standing over an empty grave with his father's axe hanging from his hand. Then the axe fell into the grass, and Cain fell after it, down onto his hands and knees among the glowing flowers, and he wept, not quietly. He wept the way he must have wept 2 years ago when Craig carried them home, the whole of it coming up out of him at once. A grown man crying out for his mother and his father into the dark, like a child who has only just learned they are not coming. Maya knelt beside him and found she had nothing. She had commanded armies of the dead and broken a saint without losing the beat of her breath. And here, with the one grief she most understood, she knelt next to a weeping man and had not one word that would help. Comfort was a language her old life had spoken to her, back when she was the one being held. She had never learned to speak it back, so she stayed. She put her hand between his shoulders, and she stayed, and let him spend it. because that at least she could do. The night went on. His crying wore itself down to something slower. When he finally spoke, his voice was scraped bare. "I only wanted to see them," he said. "Just once more. The real ones. Not that." He pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. "Is that greedy? After I told you to let them rest, I meant it. And then that thing wore her face, and He stopped. "I wanted my mother. It held nothing of them," Maya said. "You know that. Whatever souls were forced into it were false, made things. Your parents were never in that field tonight." He nodded like he believed her and did not feel it. Then he got to his feet, slow, and picked up the axe and looked once at the broken stone and started down the hill toward the far lights of Windsound alone, an empty man walking home from an empty grave. Maya watched him go 3 steps, 4. Around them, the air had begun to fill with light. They were not fireflies. They rose up out of the blossoms themselves, the flower's own glowing pollen, waking in the night air, lifting off the field in 1,000 slow points of light until it looked like the whole hill was breathing souls up into the sky. Cain stopped in the middle of it. For a moment, he just stood in the drifting light with his back to her. "I always loved this part," he said, not turning. "When they let go at night, it looks like something out of a dream, like the souls of the dead getting up to go home." A short, broken sound that was almost a laugh. "I used to think if I stood still enough, I'd see theirs." Maya looked at his small shape alone in all that light, and something in her that she kept behind glass went ahead and decided. She was a necromancer. She had spent this whole night being told what her craft could not give him. Not his true parents, not a farewell, nothing but wrong things and empty ground. But her craft did not only bind, it could also call. Not to drag a soul back and chain it, only to ask one, gently, if it would come and say goodbye. She reached up and pulled the tie from her hair and let it fall loose down her back. She took off her glasses and folded them and set them on the broken stone. She breathed out everything else, the fog, the anger, the rogue still hidden somewhere in the dark, until there was nothing left in her but the calling. And then she lifted her voice to the heroic dead of this frontier, all of them, wherever their weary spirits had gone to ground, and she asked them to come. At first nothing answered, and Maya held the call open in the dark and did not let it waver. Then the field began to gather itself. Points of the drifting pollen slowed and pulled together into soft flames the color of the flowers, and the flames stood up out of the grass and took the shapes of people, fallen men of the frontier, warriors who had died holding this border. She felt their names arrive as they did: Simon, Edmund, a big shy one called Colby, a Warren who had lost a leg and not his humor. They came because she asked, and in among them, drawn up out of the same soft light, 2 figures formed who made Cain stop breathing. They were not wearing borrowed faces. These faces moved the way living faces move, uncertain and glad and brimming. And when the woman's eyes found her son, the light of her went unsteady with it. Maya poured her own power into the 2 of them, quietly, steadily, more than she gave the rest, until they were solid enough to be held. "My son," the man's voice was warm, and only his. He looked Cain up and down, and his face broke into wonder. "Look at you. You've grown so strong. In 2 years, how did you grow so strong?" Cain could not speak. The woman crossed the grass and took his face in both her hands the way a mother does, checking it was really him, and she was crying and laughing at once. "I wanted so badly to see you again," she whispered. "My Cain, my dear, dear boy. I have wanted it every single day." He fell into them. Both of them folded him up between them in the glowing pollen, and for a moment the 3 of them were only that, a family, standing in a field, holding on. For that one moment, the grief let go of him completely, and inside it, Cain understood that this was the goodbye the abomination had tried to steal, that the thing had known exactly what he wanted and mocked it, and that here it was anyway, given freely, real, and that he could bear the losing of them a second time because he had truly had them a first. Then he came back to himself, wet-faced, and remembered the woman standing quiet in the flowers behind him, and he turned. "Mother, father," he drew Maya forward by the hand. "This is my wife. This is Maya." Maya inclined her head, low and graceful, the whole of her old lady's training rising up to steady a moment she had not known how to walk into. "I am Maya, of House Ashford," she said. "It is an honor." The mother looked at her for a long moment and then pressed both hands to her own mouth. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, what a wonderful girl." She reached out and took Maya's hand in her cool, light one. "You'll look after him. He carries everything alone. He always has. Even when he was small, you'll help him put some of it down?" "Yes," Maya said. It came out steadier than she felt. The father set a hand on Cain's shoulder, and his warmth dimmed a shade because there was one more thing, and it could not go unsaid. Listen to me now, he told his son, because we could not tell you before. The thing that killed us in the forest, it did not die. Your mother sealed it. It cost her everything she had, but she bound it deep in a cave full of poison miasma where the great forest runs darkest. It is sleeping. It is not gone. His steady eyes moved to Maya and stayed there as if he already knew who would have to face it. The poison dragon, Lastinel. Remember that name. It is still down there, and one day it will stir. The word settled over the field, and the flowers seemed to dim around it. Then the father smiled again, and the weight lifted off his face. But not tonight. Tonight our boy is not alone, and he has grown strong, and he has brought us a daughter. He drew a long, contented breath he did not need. We are only people who have already left the stage, Cain. It is your turn on it now. Go and live all of it. We are so proud of you, the mother said. We always were, every day. The light of them was already thinning. Cain held on for as long as the working would allow, and Maya let it run until the very last of her power was spent. And then, gently, like pollen lifting off a flower, Zane and Fiona let go, and rose and scattered back into the glowing dark, at peace, and were gone. Cain stood in the emptied field a while, and then he crouched down among the flowers and began, of all things, to pick them. Maya watched him gather a handful of the blue blossoms and sit cross-legged in the grass and start to weave, clumsy at first, then surer, his hands remembering something a mother must once have taught them. He worked without a word until he had made a ring of them, a crown of soul flowers, still faintly glowing. He stood and came to her and set it on her loose hair. There, he said softly. He looked at her under the paling sky with his eyes still swollen, and something new and settled behind them. I used to think looking back was the same as falling behind. It isn't. Sometimes you have to look back to find enough to carry you forward. He took her hand. Thank you, Maya, for all of it, for tonight. She did not trust her voice, so she only closed her fingers around his. Let's go home to Windsound, he said. We still have tomorrow. They went down the hill together in the last of the flower light, hand in hand, and behind them, the broken stone stood over ground that was empty now for a gentler reason than before. The dead had come and said what they came to say and gone where they were going. In her new rooms, the Countess's chambers, hers now, with a connecting door to Cain's that stayed politely locked, Maya set the crown down on the desk and did not throw it away. That surprised her. She had never kept a flower in her life. She turned it once in the dawn light. The blue nearly faded out of it now, an ordinary ring of drying blossoms. And she thought about a man of 19 who wove grief into something to give away, and about a woman with cool hands who had asked her to help him put it down, and about a name a dead father had made sure to leave behind. Lastinel, sealed, not slain, down in the dark of the great forest, sleeping in poison, waiting on a day that would come whether anyone wished it or not. She had walked out into this night to bury the past and had come back carrying the future instead. Somewhere south, the saint she had spared was still flailing, her debt cracked open and nowhere near paid. A rogue necromancer who reeked faintly of roses still called on her castle with a merchant's smile. And now, under all of it, a dragon. Maya looked at the crown a moment longer. Flowers, she murmured, aren't so bad after all. Then she left it where it was and went to the window and watched the gray come up over the frontier that had somehow, without her deciding to let it, become home. A month after Cain laid his parents to rest, Maya climbed the hill to the field of blue flowers alone and stopped where the pollen drifted because something in the air was wrong. She stood very still. Under the smell of the flowers, there was a thread of the dead, faint, cold, and not hers. She turned it over the way she turned over everything and could not place it. Left over from the thing that had worn 2 stolen faces here, or something new drifting through on an errand of its own? She had no answer, and Maya disliked not having answers. She looked out over the walls and the castle below, the frontier that had somehow become home, and told herself it was only residue. Then she went back down the hill. By afternoon, she had a tea card in front of her and a reason to stop thinking about it. She wheeled it into Cain's study, where he sat walled in behind documents, and told him the paperwork would keep. He set down his pen like a man surfacing from deep water. Thank you, Maya, he said. I lean on you too much. You lean exactly the right amount. She poured. He drank. It was Cain who found the letter, a fold of heavy paper sealed in crown wax, slipped in among the rest. He broke it, read it once, and went still. The crown had a command for the border. The army was to march with the Saint, Kiara Briscoe, and put down the sealed poison dragon in the deep forest. The beast had a name now, Lastinel. It killed my father and my mother, Cain said quietly, which Maya already knew. He turned the letter over in his fingers. His mother had spent her life to seal the thing away. The court's own mages had judged the seal would hold 20 years yet. So, why move now? And why like this? Maya took the letter and read it herself. The wrongness in it was not the dragon. "They are sending the saint," she said. "The first prince's own betrothed, marched to the mouth of something that breathes poison. No one spends a bride like that without a reason. Something under the order did not fit. And lately, the things that did not fit had all leaned the same way, toward the frontier. Always the frontier. As if a hand larger than the throne kept nudging danger their direction." She did not say that part aloud yet. Kane said he would put it to the merchant Oswald in the morning. The man heard everything worth hearing. Maya agreed and thought about the cold thread up on the hill and said nothing about that either. That night, she had a different subordinate to correct. In her chambers, she woke the dark crystal orb her dwarfsmiths had made, a thing that carried sight and sound across the whole kingdom, and reached for her agent in the capital. Eloise swam up into the glass draped across a couch, silver hair loose, a ring of glassy-eyed thralls arranged around her like cushions. The vampire queen had been sent to burrow into the palace. She had, by her own cheerful account, burrowed into the wine instead. Maya let her finish making excuses. Then she called Zoran, and the lich tore a standing rift in the air, tall enough to walk through. "Hold the frontier," she told the empty room, and stepped across the kingdom in a single stride. The capital's air closed around her, perfumed and old. Eloise came off the couch in a startle of bat wings, bolting for the tall window, and stopped in the middle of the air, one wing still spread, because Maya had reached out with a necromancer's hold and simply switched her still. Maya did not touch her. She never needed to. "You mistook leisure for latitude," she said. "Every drop of mana keeping you upright is mine. So is every drop holding each of these." A glance at the slack-faced thralls. "On their feet. I give it. I can stop giving it. You know what you and all of them become the moment I do." The playful mask slid off Eloise's face at once. She swore she understood. She swore it twice. Maya asked what the court looked like from the inside. It came out in a guilty rush. She had seated her spawn among the lesser nobles, yes, but she had left the aging chancellor and the coarse old general alone because she found the pair of them distasteful. "They are the entire point." Maya's voice did not rise. It rarely needed to. "Distaste is not a reason. Deliver those 2 seats, or the well runs dry." Eloise knelt then, wings folding, and promised the chancellor and the general both, like a woman who had finally measured the leash around her throat. Around her, one by one, the charmed thralls sank down as well, and began to call the woman who had walked in through a hole in the air their queen. Maya let them. It was a useful word. She stepped back through the rift into her own chambers, and the cost of it caught up with her all at once. The room tilted. She put out a hand and found nothing, and then found Zoran, who had come out of the dark to catch her elbow. Crossing the kingdom and back in a single night was a great deal of mana, even for her. The lich apologized in that dry mind voice of his for the burden, and said what he always said, that she could ease the drain in a heartbeat if she would only take off the cold thing at her collar. Maya's hand closed over it, the small, dull brooch her husband had given her, the one that pulled at her strength every hour of every day. "No," she said. She would take it off exactly once, at exactly the right moment, and not a breath before. Zoran did not ask what moment. He had learned not to. He only held her steady until the room stopped moving. Oswald Osborne came to the castle the next morning, wrapped in rose perfume, scattering the scent ahead of him like a herald. He was all smooth courtesy over the contract, a bulk of medicines and antidotes for the army, the rights to the dragon's rare parts once it fell. And under the roses, so faint that only Maya caught it, there was the other smell, something stale, something like the dead. She filed it away with the thread on the hill and said nothing. Information, the merchant reminded them pleasantly, was also a commodity, and commodities had a price. His price was a seat on the hunt, to show off his company's new wares in a real fight, he said, and to be first in line for the dragon's remains. Kane agreed. Maya added a price of her own. She was coming too. "Absolutely not," Kane started. "It's far too dang," and got no further, because Maya had folded him gently into an embrace that muffled the rest of the sentence against her shoulder. When she let him go, he had stopped arguing. Then the merchant paid his debt, and the intelligence was better than Maya had dared hope. The saint was falling. In the capital, Kiara Briscoe had been useless during a certain panic in the streets, a panic Maya remembered fondly, having caused it herself. She avoided the palace. She had been seen on the arms of men who were not the first prince. Her shine was going gray, and there it was, the whole shape of the order. The prince's faction and the church had not sent their saint to kill a dragon. They had sent the border army to kill it for her, so she could stand over the corpse and and be holy again. The frontier would bleed. The saint would be repaired with the credit. Maya turned it over and felt, underneath, the larger hand again. The crown steered, but something behind the crown was steering the crown. Aloud, she said only that a saint too weak to fight was no use dead, and offered, lightly, to lend the woman a little of her own surplus power for the hunt. Cain looked at her as if she had lost her mind. She had not. A saint who owed Maya her survival was worth a great deal more than one who simply died in a cave. "It's time," she said, "that Kiara and I had a proper talk." The Windsound Chapel was a crumbling little place the Count's coin kept breathing. Maya found the saint inside it, on her knees before the goddess statue, praying with great feeling for some divine hand to strike down the irritating necromancer who had ruined her. Maya let her finish the prayer before answering it. Kiara nearly climbed the statue in fright. It took a while to talk her down. No, Maya told her. She had not turned the border Count into a monster. The rumor was nonsense. The Count was alive and perfectly himself. And here he was. Cain stepped in out of his armor in a plain waistcoat, slight and young-looking, and unmistakably a grown man. The saint's terror flipped over into delight. She lunged to throw her arms around him and announced that she would add him to her collection of admirers. Future queen that she was, betrothed to a prince, surely entitled to a handsome count as well. Cain sidestepped her entirely. "Mind the distance between us," he said, cold as the stone, and left her grasping at air. Maya watched the saint tip from one delusion into the next, thought of Eloise, and decided the two of them ought to compare notes someday. Then she told Kiara what the hunt was truly for. Not a poison lizard, the poison dragon, Lastinal. The delight collapsed. Kiara scrambled back behind the statue, refusing outright, babbling that no one had told her, that she would not go, that this was not how any of it was supposed to happen. The game had never put a dragon this early. The game, Maya repeated. She could have let it lie. Instead, she took off her glasses. She did not raise her voice. She had come to the end of what raising a voice was worth, but something in the room shifted when the glass came away from her eyes, and even Kiara felt it. "This world is not a game," Maya said. "The people in it have souls. They bleed and they grieve and they do not come back for another try. I know what you are because I am what you are. The only difference between us is that I learned that. You still haven't." Kiara's mouth fell open. She started to blurt out the word, the one neither of them was ever supposed to say, and Maya laid a single finger against her lips and stopped it cold. She would tell the crown the saint had bravely joined the hunt, Maya said, and let her hide in this chapel until the dragon was dead. A gift. Kiara could count it a favor owed. Then she put her glasses back on and walked out, and did not look to see whether the saint was grateful, because it did not matter yet. The party would be four and no more. Maya, Cain, Craig, and the merchant. A dragon's breath could kill 100 men in a single lungful, so they would bring almost none, and Craig would be the sword. The night before they left, Maya found him in the wild back corner of the castle grounds, drilling alone in the dark. Rachel was already there, tucked into the shadows, watching him the way she thought no one saw. Maya joined her. Craig drew. Maya, whose eyes missed very little, did not even see the blade move, only a falling leaf coming apart into 4 pieces before it touched the grass. The sword demon, they had called him once, and the name still fit. Rachel flicked a nut at his back. It struck between his shoulders, and he did not so much as turn, muttering something about the wind, and Rachel's face did a small, unhappy thing before she smoothed it away. Maya stepped out of the shadows and told him the draw had been flawless. Craig only bowed his head and said he was not strong enough, and the old grief came up out of him unasked. 2 years ago, the dragon had come. The old count had died in the poison breath, shielding his people. The countess had spent her own life to seal the thing behind its barrier. Craig had been there. Craig had lost an eye there. Craig had saved neither of them. He touched the small locket at his throat as he spoke, a portrait of the late countess he had carried close all this while. "If you mean to trade your life for theirs," Maya said, "don't. I will not raise you. A living butler at Cain's side is worth more to me than a corpse on a floor." He shook his head. He was one man, he said. No one would grieve him. Maya thought Cain would, and told him so. And Craig flinched as if struck, because he believed the opposite. He believed the young lord could only hate the powerless retainer who had let his parents die. She asked quietly whether he had loved the countess. Nothing improper, he said at once. Only admired her. Only taken the butler's post to stay near a light like that. And then, lower, that whoever had defiled the count and countess in their graves was still out there, unfound. And if he ever stood face to face with that person, he did not know if he could hold himself together. To answer it, he turned and drew again, and a boulder the size of a cart slid apart and fell open on the grass. "I will cut them down," Craig said. "The dragon, and the one who touched their bones." Without fail, Maya believed him. That was rather what worried her. They rode out at dawn behind Sleipnir, the 8-legged dead horse, in a carriage that was small on the outside and a hall on the inside. Rachel had put Maya into the black and purple gown they called the twilight dress, a divine thing, armor pretending to be silk, because the Countess would not face a dragon in her old robes. By midday, the forest that took 3 days to cross on foot stood in front of them, and there the road ended. Maya climbed down, looked at the trees, and decided she did not care to walk for 3 days. She called them up out of the empty air: Zoran, Lysander, Nathaniel, Tobias, the 4 liches rising into their tall, regenerated shapes as her mana poured into them. 2 of them lifted their hands, and a wind that was not a wind screwed itself into a lance and touched the forest. The trees went down, not a few of them, all of them. A whole broad swath of ancient timber, torn up and flung aside in a roar that beat the birds out of the sky for a mile around. Where the wind passed, there was a corridor of raw stumps and open air, dead straight, running off toward the distant mountain. Then the other 2 liches set their palms to the churned earth, and the earth obeyed, the ruts and roots and broken ground pressing themselves flat, packing down into a smooth, pale road, as if a god had run a thumb along the world. It took less than a minute. It ran nearly to the horizon. Kane's face did the thing it did whenever Maya reminded him what he had married. Craig had gone quite still. Only the merchant seemed delighted, praising the work in his smooth way, while his eyes traveled slowly over the 4 undead who had made it, measuring, always measuring, as though weighing what such servants might be worth to him. He offered her a potion to top up her mana. She refused. She grew faster the hard way. He mentioned, lightly, that he also carried the kind that made a mage stronger still, and behind her, both Kane and Craig went faintly ill at the thought. Maya stepped onto the road her dead had made, and the party followed her toward the mountain. The road brought them to the mouth of the miasma cave in half a day. It had been an ordinary cave once. 2 years of the dragon's poison had made it something else. A vast glowing throat in the mountain, lit green by luminous moss. The air thick enough to kill. Kane sealed himself into gleaming orichalcum plate and took up a great axe, bareheaded so he could see. Craig buckled a breastplate over his uniform and drew his long curved blade. Rachel simply vanished. Maya summoned Nathaniel to hang a poison nullifying barrier over them all, and they put their masks away and went in. Craig warned her not to trust the barrier too far. The dragon's worst breath was poison, and wind married together, he said, and no ward yet made could catch the wind. Maya told the party to keep their guard up, and the cave answered her by trying to kill them. The monsters came from both ends at once. Poison hydras and a basilisk, toads and slimes, and a dripping cloud of bats, boiling out of the dark, ahead and behind. Maya took the rear herself. She called up Godfrey, her headless knight, and Rue, the hopping corpse girl, and the 2 of them went through the horde like a storm through wheat, Godfrey booming with laughter the whole time, Rue daring the beast to come back with 10,000 more. A toad's tongue lashed out of the mass straight at Maya and was gone, sheared away by twin black short swords as Rachel dropped from the ceiling to finish the thing, casting one quick glance at Craig to see whether he had noticed. He had not. He was at the front, cutting down 3 and 4 at a stroke, seeing nothing but the road to the dragon. Only the merchant fought strangely. When a bat gave Kane trouble in the air, Oswald rolled a small metal ball across the stone. It split open, and a snarl of grasping vines sprang out, dragged the bat down, finished it, and then simply died, withering to brown string in a breath. Kane said it seemed cruel, a life spent the instant it was let out of the ball. The plant never minded, the merchant answered mildly. Plants troubled themselves with nothing at all, which was the whole of their charm, and his eyes wandered, as he said it, across Maya's tireless dead, and did not finish whatever thought had started them moving. The horde ended. The party stepped over what was left of it and went down, toward the deep place where the dragon slept. They sent Godfrey and Rue back to the space between spaces first. The 2 of them had started bickering again, and this was not a place for noise. The deepest chamber opened out huge and silent, and at the heart of it stood the seal, a pyramid of pale light, taller than a house, humming faintly to itself. The Countess had raised it with the last of her life 2 years ago, and it had held. Cain stood before it a long moment, and Maya saw him go somewhere else entirely. His mother had given him her blue eyes, and he was looking at her handwriting in the light. She said his name once and brought him back. Craig went down on one knee. He asked formally for the right to face the dragon alone, to answer for the lord and lady he had failed. Blade against breath, the way the debt demanded. Cain refused. He would not risk an ally he could not replace, he said, not on pride. And then Rachel knelt too. That stopped everyone. Rachel bent her knee to no one but Maya, ever. And here she was, on the stone beside the swordsman. It is what he needs, she said quietly, if he is ever to walk into a future. A man could not drag a debt this size behind him forever, she added, and she would step in herself the instant it turned. Craig stared at her as though she had spoken in a language he had lost years ago. Cain looked to Maya. Maya nodded once, so he relented. Craig could have his duel, on the one condition that they would all move the moment it went wrong. Craig bowed his head over his blade and swore to win without fail. Then Cain walked to the seal to open it. The password was 6 words his mother had loved, and he spoke them softly, like a prayer, like a hand laid flat on a grave. When the seasons turn, the flowers bloom again and again. The pyramid of light broke. It did not fade, it shattered all at once, a whole cathedral of light going to falling glass, the pieces winking out before they struck the ground. And in the dark space where it had stood, something that had looked almost small, curled tight, folded down on itself through 2 years of sleep, opened. It kept opening. A neck and then more neck, and a spread of dark green scale that drank the moss light and gave back nothing at all, and a body that rose and rose until it filled the chamber to its stone ceiling. 2 golden eyes came open in the vast wedge of its skull and found them. Poison steamed off it in slow curtains and pooled along the floor. Here it was. The old wound in this land. The thing that had eaten a count and a countess and never once been made to pay. Awake. Lastinel lifted its head against the roof of the world and roared, and the whole mountain took the sound and shook with it, and dust came sifting down through the dark. And the second half of the war they had wandered into began right there, wide awake and looking straight at them. The dragon roared, and the mountain took the sound and shook, and Craig walked into it. He did not run. He did not raise a shield. He simply crossed the shaking ground toward the thing that filled the cavern. One old man in a dented breastplate with a long curved blade held low at his side. And when Lastinel bent its wedge of a skull down at him and let its golden eyes do the work that had frozen braver men, Craig answered with a roar of his own that scraped the walls. Whatever the beast had meant to plant in him did not take. Then they moved together, and the air came apart. Craig's blade met a claw the size of a plow and turned it. He was already gone before the tail came around, already inside the reach of the bite, cutting where a scale seam ran and finding it hard as forged plate. Lastinel wheeled. Craig went with it. For a handful of breaths, the two of them were a single blur in the green light. Steel ringing off horn and scale so fast, the strikes ran into one long tearing note, and each time they clashed, the shock jumped out into the rock and cracked it, and dust came sifting down through the poison steam. From the dark at the chamber's edge, Maya watched with her glasses catching the sour glow, and she saw what the old man could not yet feel. He was losing, not by much, and not all at once, but the dragon had claws and a bite, and a tail, and a body the size of a barn, and it could threaten from 4 directions in the time it took Craig to threaten from 1. Every exchange cost him a little ground he could not buy back. He was a master. He was still only a man, and there was only one of him, and there were far too many edges on the thing he had sworn to kill. Craig felt it a beat after she saw it. His breath had gone ragged behind the eyepiece. His arms had begun to argue with him, and into that first cold thought that this was slipping, the dragon drew a long breath, and its throat lit from the inside like a coal. The poison breath came out in a wall. Craig read it and threw himself clear, and the pale flood missed him, but it did not stop. It rolled on across the chamber toward the 3 who stood watching, toward Cain in his pale gold plate, and Rachel with her twin blades, and Maya in the black gown, and it came fast. Maya lifted one hand. She did not hurry. A barrier stood up out of nothing between the group and the cloud, thrown up at her word by one of the dead she kept close, and where the poison touched it, the poison simply stopped being poison. The wind died against it. The venom went thin and gray and harmless, and what curled past the edges, she scattered with a turn of her wrist until the air near them was only air again. Cain had not so much as flinched. He had learned this past month not to. Out in the middle of it, Craig came up out of his role and did not attack. He stood there with the breath rasping in his chest, and the fight went out of his shoulders, and Maya knew that slump the way she knew grief itself. She had seen it on soldiers who had decided the math no longer worked. He had one move left that could reach the dragon through that breath. The killing thrust his old style kept for exactly this. A lunge that punched straight through the poison and buried the blade to the guard. Dragon Fang. It would carry him into the cloud and into the jaws with it. It would take the dragon down. It would take him too. And he had already decided that was a fair trade, that a useless old sword was worth more spent than kept. If you mean to trade your life for theirs, don't, Maya said, flat across the chamber. I told you before, Craig. I will not raise you as an undead if you fall. If you mean to keep your oath, then live to keep it. Rachel moved before he could answer. She was at the barrier's edge, and her voice, always so level, always so careful, cracked straight down the middle. If you die here, then I will follow you. Her twin blades hung forgotten in her hands. I will refuse this half-life the dead are given, and I will leave the world the same hour. There is nothing in it for me if you are not in it. Her pale eyes never left his back. I longed to see you again so badly that I rose as a corpse to do it. That is the whole of why I am still here. Craig, I was Ghost Ray, the kingdom's agent you pulled out of the fire all those years ago when I was too young and too used up to save myself. You saved me then. Do not make me watch you throw yourself away now. Craig turned his head. For the first time in the fight, something in his face broke open. Then Cain's voice came across the stone, hoarse and furious and young. You swore it, Cain said. At my mother's grave, you knelt in that dirt, and you told her you would guard this border without fail. You do not get to give up halfway, Craig. You do not get to leave that promise for the rest of us to carry. Something changed in the old man's stance. The despair drained out of it and left behind a stillness so complete it looked like a different person had stepped into his skin. He drew his weight back and low, the blade sliding to rest just behind his hip. Edge turned out. Everything gathered into the one draw he had been saving his whole life for a moment he thought he would never be calm enough to use. Thank you, he said, to all of them and to none of them. His voice had gone very quiet. Now, I feel I could cut through anything at all. Lastinel drew its second breath, and the throat lit again, and the wall of poison came. Craig cut. He did not step. That was the thing Maya would remember, watching from the dark, that the old man did not take a single stride, did not lunge, did not close the long stretch of ruined ground between himself and the beast. He only drew once, the way a man might draw a curtain, and the blade came out of its low rest faster than the eye could hold it, faster than a thing that size had any right to be, and the draw did not end where his reach ended. It kept going. The stroke opened the poison down its middle like cloth, and the two halves of the pale flood peeled away to either side and did not touch him. It crossed the whole span of the chamber in the time it takes to blink. It reached across the distance the way a beam of light reaches across a room, all at once and everywhere along its length, and it found the dragon at the far end of itself, infinite sky. Not a thrust that spent a life, a cut that spent nothing but the man's whole patience gathered into one clean line, and it went through the poison, and it went through the empty air, and it went through Lastinel. For a moment, nothing moved. The green light held, the steam hung. Then, the great dark green head came down. The vast body followed it, folding, sinking, the golden eyes going flat and dim, and Lastinel dropped to the floor of the cavern it had woken to fill, and the sound of it landing rolled away into the deep tunnels and did not come back. Craig stayed low a breath longer. Then he straightened, slow, an old man again, and he looked at the fallen thing that had killed the two people he had loved most in the world. Zane, he said, you are avenged. Without fail, his hand had gone to the small locket at his throat. Fiona, until the day we meet again. Craig let his breath out. The danger was over. He had won. He wiped the long blade clean along his forearm, and he looked back toward the barrier where Maya stood, and something in his cold face almost softened. Thank you, he said to her, for the blade. It held. He slid it home into its sheath with a small final click, the sound a man makes when a thing is finished. It was not finished. Behind him, the fallen dragon was changing. The dark green scales were going darker still, going black, and where the golden eyes had dimmed, a low red was coming up in them instead, and the great body that had dropped so heavily gathered itself off the stone without a breath in it. Maya saw it a half second before anyone. She was already moving, already opening her mouth, but half a second is not enough, even for her, across that much ground. Rachel was closer. She hit Craig from the side and drove him out of the space where he stood, and the blow that had been meant for his back took her instead. It struck her down. It broke her. An outcome, not a spectacle, the strength going out of her all at once, so that she folded to the stone with only the smallest part of herself still holding together, still able to speak, and no more. She was undead. She was not, even so, truly beyond restoring. But looking at her, Craig did not know that, and for him, the world simply ended. Rachel! He was on his knees in the same motion, gathering the broken remnant of her up against the breastplate, and the terror on the old swordsman's face was a thing his enemies had never once been allowed to see. She looked up at him. Whatever she had left, she spent it here. Run, she breathed first, and then, when he did not, when he only held her tighter, the fear went out of her, and something quiet came in its place. Your chest is warm, she said, wondering at it. So this is what it was, to be alive. All this time, there was a wall between us I could never once cross. Her pale eyes found his and stayed there. But it is all right now, to rest against the chest I loved. I was glad in the end, glad that I rose as a corpse. It brought me back to you. Her voice thinned to almost nothing. Thank you, Craig. Then she went still in his arms, and the old man bowed his head over her and did not make a sound. Someone clapped, once, softly, from the mouth of the deep chamber. Oswald Osborne stepped into the red light, and the charming merchant was gone. The rose perfume was still there, but he had stopped bothering to hide the reek of the dead underneath it. His fine coat had become a necromancer's cloak. His mild, bespectacled smile had gone cold and fixed. He looked at the black dragon rising to its feet behind them, the way a smith looks at good work. And Maya, watching him, felt the last small piece of the puzzle drop into the place she had already left for it a month ago. He told them what he wanted, and his voice never once rose, and every word of it came through the story Maya's own steady narration made of him, never once his own performed and preening in the air. He reminded them, almost fondly, that he had said all along he wanted the dragon's body. Now he wanted all of it. He rolled his hand toward the black thing behind them and named it his, raised by him, obedient to him, the beginning of a kingdom of the dead with himself crowned king of it, and the princess of the dead. His eyes went to Maya here and stayed. The princess of the dead would rule it at his side. He would spare the old swordsman, he offered, generous, if the swordsman simply stepped away and let him have the corpse. Then he tipped a handful of small metal balls out onto the stone, and they cracked open, and the things that unfolded out of them were wrong. They had been people, or beasts once. Now they were reshaped, bodies treated and bent and refitted while still warm, he explained through Maya's telling, hollowed of whatever they had been, and stuffed with a false, obedient soul in its place, so that they answered on almost no power at all. More than a dozen of them dragged themselves upright around him. He seemed proud of them, he said, and Maya's narration carried the contempt in it flat and dry, that feelings like the one the maid had just died of were repugnant to him. Sentiment made poor soldiers, and his soulless things made far better ones. Then he told them the rest, because he wanted them to know before the end. The zombie wolves that had thrown themselves against Windsound's wall, his. The swarm of dead insects that had blackened the sky, his. The slime that had risen in the market fountain and snatched a child, his. The thing wearing the stolen faces of Cain's father and mother, the abomination in the flower field, that had been his experiment, a test of whether the dead could be made to inherit the living's gifts. The graves of the old count and countess, opened and their bodies stolen away to be broken and remade. That had been his hand too. Cain made a sound that had no words in it and started forward with the great axe swinging up. Craig laid Rachel down and rose with murder in his one good eye and his blade half out of its sheath. Maya stepped in front of them both. Stop, she said, not loud. She never needed to be loud. He is mine. Maya took off her glasses, folded them, and looked at Oswald with her bare violet eyes. You dress a corpse and call it a kingdom, she said. You raised a dragon and left it half rotted at the seams because you do not have the power to do it properly. Third-rate work. She let that sit. And you have been third-rate this whole time, and I have watched you be it since the day you walked up to me at the fountain. The rose you drown yourself in. It never once covered the smell of the dead on your hands. You went back for the frozen slime after we left it, quietly, to take the pieces home. And the potion you were so generous with on the road, the one you pressed on me for my strength, I never drank it. It was not for strength. It was a drug to turn the living into the dead. "I have known what you are for some time now, Oswald. I simply wanted to see how far you would walk out onto the ice before it broke." For the first time, the fixed smile moved. He recovered fast. He admitted it. Then, through her telling, still never performed, admitted he was no mere merchant, but a necromancer. And more than that, a spy. The modified dead, the whole grotesque craft of them, were not his invention, but the Empire's. And the border was not his hunting ground, but the Empire's laboratory, a quiet stretch of someone else's kingdom where such things could be tested, and no one who mattered would notice the cost. She asked him evenly, why the dragon? And he told her that too, proud of the scale of it. Lastanel had been raised from an egg by the Empire, steeped in poison from the day it hatched, grown into a living weapon, and then it had slipped its makers and vanished into this forest 2.5 years ago to sleep behind a dead woman's seal until tonight. Behind him, the black dragon finished waking into its second, colder life, and Oswald spread his arms and told them what he held. With this in his hand, he said, he could bring down the kingdom, and then turn and bring down the empire that made it, and no throne anywhere would stand against the king of the dead. Maya raised one hand, the way she had raised it against the poison, without hurry. She did not speak a spell. She simply exerted her will, undead domination running out of her and over the black dragon like a tide going out. And the Empire's stolen weapon, the thing Oswald had schemed and murdered and betrayed a kingdom to hold, turned its red eyes off him and lowered its vast head to the floor at her feet and stayed there. It took her no visible effort at all. It was the effort of a woman telling a dog to sit. The chamber went very quiet. "With so little magic to your name," Maya said, mild, almost kind. "Whatever made you think you could beat me?" The dragon, hers now, loosed a roar that staggered even Craig on his feet. Maya did not move. Her hair stirred and nothing else, and she watched the color drain out of the necromancer's face as the shape of the trap he had walked into finally closed over his head. Far from any cave, at that same hour, another kind of ground was giving way. While Oswald was still boasting in the dark, the work Maya had set turning months before came quietly due in the capital. Eloise had done, at last, exactly what she had sworn to do. The aging chancellor whose ear she had found distasteful and the coarse old general she had put off, both had been taken in the end, bloodbound, and turned to Maya's purpose. And with them went the last honest hinges of the prince's faction. His court did not fall in a single loud stroke. It fell the way a rotten floor falls, all at once, and only when the weight comes on, one seat after another revealed to be already hollow, already Maya's, already calling her queen in rooms the prince thought were his. And with the court went the last thing propping up the saint. Kiara's whole crawlback had been built on the crown's protection. The dragon hunt meant to make a hero of her on the border army's dead. The prince's hand at her back to keep her useful. Now the hand was gone. The empire's shadow behind it all was being dragged into the light. There would be no glorious hunt to rescue her name. No faction left to shelter a saint who could not work a single miracle in a land the dead had made their own. The establishment that had thrown Maya to the block 11 years ago, that had cheered while a villainess was led to die, was coming apart from the inside, its prince exposed, its empire backer named, its darling saint left standing on nothing at all. None of it was finished. Not yet. But the ground the discarders stood on had begun, at last, to go out from under them. In the cave, Oswald was still trying to make his ruined weapon answer him. It would not. The dragon lay at Maya's feet, and did not so much as turn its head for him, and the more he strained after it, the more plainly the whole shape of the thing showed. The great scheme, the Empire's spy, the king of the dead, all of it standing on borrowed power in front of a woman whose power was not borrowed from anyone. His grotesque soldiers shifted and did not attack. He had come here to take a princess and a kingdom, and instead he had walked, smiling, into a room with someone who dwarfed him, and he had confessed every last crime of his own free will before he understood which of them was the trap. Cain came to stand at Maya's shoulder, the axe still in his grip, his blue eyes fixed on the man who had worn his parents' faces like a costume. Craig stood on her other side over the still form of Rachel, his hand back on his blade, waiting only for the word. Between the three of them and the score of ruined things at the necromancer's back, the air was strung tight enough to hum. Maya did not give the word yet. There were things she still wanted from Oswald Osborne before the night was done. What else the Empire had buried in these hills, and how deep, and who else wore a merchant's smile over a spy's face? And there were things of her own she was not finished carrying, the small dull weight still pinned at her collar under the black silk, draining her by the hour, that she had promised to take off only once, at the one right moment, and not a breath before. And that moment, whatever it was not this one. That reckoning belonged to a night still ahead. For now, she only looked at the man who had helped a kingdom throw her away, and who had come all this long way to the border to be the one who finally learned what that had cost. She found, standing there with a dragon at her feet, and the capital falling behind him, and every mask in the room finally down, that she could wait a little longer for the rest. She had waited 11 years already. A little longer was nothing at all. Oswald would not accept that the dragon was no longer his. He stood among his stalled undead with the black cloak hanging off him, and told Maya, in that mild, ruined voice, that a woman with magic like hers was wasted out here on a frontier. Power that fine belonged at his side, in the empire that had made him. In the kingdom of the dead, he still meant to raise from the ashes of 2 nations. He said it the way another man might offer a chair, as if the last hour had not happened, as if the dragon bowed at her feet were a thing he could simply call back. Maya let him talk. She had found long ago that men like this ran out of words faster when no one interrupted. Then his hand went into the cloak and came out with a small glass vial, and that changed the shape of the air. She knew it before he drank. An ether booster, an imperial thing, the kind of potion the empire fed its weapons instead of bread. Swallow it, and your magic multiplied 100 times over for a short, screaming window, and afterward, you could not touch magic at all, sometimes for days. A gambler's dose. He tipped it back like wine. Black power boiled off him. It rolled up the walls and drank the green glow and pressed on the chamber until the stone seemed to lean inward. His grip closed on Lastinel again, a 100-fold hand reaching for a leash she was holding, and for the first time since the mask came down, he smiled like a man who had already won. So Maya gave him what he wanted. She let her shoulders drop. She let the breath go out of her, let her chin fall, let the black gown hang like something with no one inside it. No good, she said, low, as though the words cost her. Not like this. I can't win. Maya. Craig had a hand halfway to her before he caught himself. Are you all right? She did not answer him. She was watching Oswald's face open with delight, watching the certainty flood back into a man who had, 1 minute ago, been drained white. He drew the dragon toward him. He told her, glowing, that this was mercy, that she could still be his, that a queen only had to kneel once. You seem very sure of yourself, Maya said. She lifted her head. Are you really going to tell me you still haven't shown me your best? Her hand rose to her collar. There was a small thing pinned there, under the purple threaded silk. A dull little brooch shaped like a bull's skull. The gift her husband had bought her in a sunlit market a lifetime ago. She had worn it every day since. She had refused to take it off through the dragon, through the betrayal, through Rachel going down. Only at the one right moment she had promised herself. Not a breath before. I'll take it off for just a little while, she said, almost to herself. Such a shame. It was a gift from him. I would have enjoyed releasing it more once I'd trained a few years further. She unpinned it. The chamber came apart, not the stone, the air. Power went out of her like a held breath finally let go, and it was black, and it was vast, and it filled the sealed room with wind that had nowhere to go, so it simply turned. A storm coiling on itself, lightning crawling up the walls in white veins. Her hair lifted. The green cave glow drowned. Where she had stood spent and small a moment before, she stood now with the storm pouring off her shoulders like a cloak she had merely forgotten she owned. The Demon King's emblem drinks its wearer's magic, she said, and her voice carried flat and clear through the roar, without end. As long as I wore it, my strength was held down to about 1,000th of what it truly is. 1,000th. The number landed in the room like a dropped stone. She had been fighting an imperial necromancer, a dragon, a chamber full of made things, at 1,000th of herself, and now the seal was off. Oswald's 100-fold looked suddenly very small. The storm rolled out from her and washed over Lastinel, and the dragon's borrowed leash snapped without a sound. The red coals of its eyes turned from him to her. The black head lifted, swung, and lowered again, bowing, this time to a will there was no arguing with. His grip had been a hand on a mountain. Hers was the mountain, and for one breath, the chamber belonged to the dead he had made. The more than a dozen reshaped things around him, the hollowed soldiers he had built out of the people he ruined. They remembered. Under the false souls he had stitched into them, the true ones stirred, and every one of them held the same last thought. The moment a stranger's hands had taken them apart while they were still warm. They did not think the word revenge. They thought a smaller, older word, closer to please and closer to know, and they turned, all of them, toward the man who had turned toward them for shelter. Maya watched it come to Oswald's face, the understanding. She did not look away, but she did not need to see the rest, and neither did anyone else. His own creations closed on their maker, and he did not survive what followed. It happened where the storm dark was thickest, and the storm was kind enough to keep it there. Somewhere in that same instant, with all of her strength back in her hands for the first time in 11 years, Maya felt how easy it would be. The deathless road was right there, the powder work she had once turned over in her mind, the craft that could make a body that never ended, never aged, never had to stop. She had 1,000-fold now. She could simply refuse to die. She let it go by. She had not clawed her way back through one life and into another, to spend forever standing still. What the power was for was the living. That was all it had ever been for. Craig let out a slow breath beside Kane, and the two of them traded a look she caught out of the corner of her eye, the look of men who had seen someone learn the truth about her before, and found the shock familiar. When it was done, the made things did not go looking for anyone else. They grew still. Then they turned to her, a dozen ruined shapes, hollow-eyed and swaying. And what came off them was not menace. It was a question, and under the question, a plea. Their maker was gone. The false souls he had bound them with were unraveling, and what was left of the real ones only wanted the one thing no one had offered them since the day they died. Maya went to them the way you go to something wounded. "What will you do?" she asked low. "Your bodies are already failing. He did sloppy work. He always did. If nothing holds you here, I can send you on." They answered without words. She lifted her hand and snapped her fingers. Once, and the whole broken guard of them let go at the same moment and came apart into fine gray dust and drifted down and were quiet. Something like thanks went out of the room as they went. It was the cleanest thing that had happened in that chamber all night. Kane had come to her shoulder. When she straightened, he was already moving to put himself between her and the dark patch of floor where Oswald had fallen. "Maya, don't look. I'm not a child." She caught his arm and turned him, gently, so that neither of them faced it. "Don't shield me from it, but don't stand and watch it either. There's nothing there worth carrying with you." It was not finished, though. It was never that simple with a man like this. A voice came up out of the dark, thin, drained, clinging to the last few sparks of itself. Oswald, or the very end of him, unwilling to fall alone. He had one more thing. He wanted her to know it. He wanted it to be the last thing she heard from him. A funeral wreath. Soul flowers cut over a month ago. The kind woven to lay the dead to rest. He had fed them his fertilizer every day since, forced the blossoms into something that had never existed before. Plants that could be raised. Plants with an appetite. Soul eaters, he called them. The finest servants a man could want. No feelings, no grief to rebel, only teeth. And they were near Windsound already, and he grieved fading, only that he would not live to see them reach the town. Paraphrase. The wreath itself came out of Maya's spatial store as he spoke. She had carried it warily this whole time, and the withered blossoms on it snapped open with small wet mouths and lashed at Kane's boots. She did not even turn her head. Lysander unfolded out of the dark at a thought from her, flamboyant and grinning, and burned the thing to a black smear on the stone. Then she looked down at what was left of Oswald. "Still clinging on, are you?" she said. There was no heat in it. That was the terrible part. "Death is more than you've earned. I won't finish you." Her power settled over him, and she raised him. But she raised him with nothing. No strength, no magic. Not a scrap of the craft he had built his whole cruelty on. Not enough left in him to lift a stone or harm a fly. A husk that would crawl and go on crawling. A penance with no end and no exit. The man who had despised all feeling in his dead left, with nothing at all to feel it with. "You'll wear this until it wears out," she told him. "Only the crawling. That's all that's left." She turned from him for the last time and set her hand on Lastanel's lowered head. "All right," she said. "From today, you're mine." The dragon shivered under her palm, pleased. She called Tobias up to lighten her weight, swung onto the black scaled neck, and looked back once at the three of them, Craig and Rachel, folded pale against his breastplate, and Kane. "Quickly," she said. "Back to Windsound. We have to reach the Soul Eaters before they reach the town." Kane would not be left behind. He came up to the dragon's side in his orichalcum plate, bareheaded, the great axe still in his fist, and told her flatly that he was coming. She hesitated. She could carry the field alone, and she did not want him near a thing that ate souls. He heard the hesitation and set his jaw against it. "Take me with you. I'm already in armor. Until you cast, at least let me be the shield that takes the first blow." His voice cracked and steadied. What kind of husband can't protect his own wife? And the wanting to protect her did something the whole dragon hunt had not. Gold light bloomed up through his armor from the inside, poured out of the seams of the plate, ran down the axe haft and pooled around his boots. His parents' power. The guardian job, the inherited thing that had slept in his blood since the day they died for this land, woke all at once. Not to the threat to his people, not to duty, but to the plain fierce need to stand in front of the woman he loved. Craig moved before anyone told him to. "As you wish, my lord. Forgive me." He drew and struck in the same breath, the flat of the long blade cracking hard across Kane's shoulder, and the blow simply slid off, turned aside by nothing at all, like a stone skated across a golden pane. It was real then, fully awakened. Kane went down on one knee in the plate, gold still steaming off him, and looked up at her. "Maya, please, let me protect you with this." She looked at him a long moment, privately, and she would not have said it aloud for anything. She was glad. Not that he had power now, that it had come from her, and not from the grave he was walking away from. "I'll be burning the field from the air with the Lich's great magic," she said. "Numbers won't help against this, so it has to be fire from above." She reached down a hand. "And I'm told a guardian's shield covers every ally on the same field, so you flying with me is enough. You don't have to stand in front of anything, just come." She lifted him onto Lastanel's back with a twist of gravity and wind and seated him behind her. Rachel, still knitting herself together in Craig's arms, called up sourly that she would simply regrow the rest of herself and follow, and Craig told her quietly to leave it to him and to stay. The dragon gathered itself, layered flight over flight, until the air bent around it and dropped down the long tunnel like a thrown spear. The field opened out below them under the moon, and it was not corrupted yet. It lay the way it had lain the day Cain wove her a crown here. Acres of pale blue soul flowers, the flowers people gathered to lay their dead to rest, the flowers his mother and father were meant to be sleeping under. Except their bodies were gone, taken, and the wreath that had poisoned everything had already been cut from this ground a month past. Whatever was coming would come up through here. She felt Cain go still at her back. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. It has to be all of it." "Then do it," he said. "I can bring flowers back. I can't bring the town back once they're gone." Maya summoned the Liches. All four of them tore up out of the dark at once and settled onto the dragon's spine. And then the trouble was not too little power, but too much. She poured her strength into them, unsealed strength, more than she had ever had to give, and it hit them like a river hitting a cup. They reeled. One gasped that it was a torrent, that this was almost too much. Another cried that they were coming apart at the seams. A third said he had never in death felt anything like the rush of it. And Lysander, of course, threw his arms wide and declared his lady merciless and wonderful in the same breath. "Then don't waste it," Maya said. "Vermilion storm, now!" The four of them cast as one. Fire fell on the field like a second sky. It did not spread the way fire spreads. It arrived, everywhere at once, a red storm that folded the whole meadow into flame between one heartbeat and the next. The blue flowers were gone before they could burn. For a moment, there was only the roar and the light, and the heat washing up against Cain's gold shield. And then the scorched ground answered. Something came up out of the black earth in the center of the fire, thorned stalks thick as tree trunks, unspooling into the smoke, and blossoms opening on the ends of them. Blossoms the size of cottages, ringed with rows of pale teeth. One vast flower at the heart of it reared up over the rest and roared, and the roar was loud enough to roll across the plain and rattle the far walls of wind sound, loud enough to wake every soul in the town. The Liches threw a wall of silence around Maya and Cain against the sound of it. Cain named the thing, low, over her shoulder, and there was no fear in it, only recognition. Soul Eater. Down below, the thing caught a wild deer that had bolted from the flames. Maya saw it happen, and something in her went cold and quiet. It did not just kill the deer. A maw came down, and the little life winked out, not into the ground, not into the wheel of things, just out, gone as if it had never been. "How cruel," she murmured. "It doesn't only take the body, it eats the soul as well. That deer can never come back now, not into anything." Then it turned its many mouths on them. She and the Liches struck first, a combined chant, ice this time, platinum world, a spell that dropped the temperature of the whole world for an instant, and locked the great plant in a mountain of frost. For a breath it held. Then the ice cracked from the inside, and the Soul Eater shattered its own frozen shell and flung a spray of dark seeds wide across the burned field. Where each seed struck, a smaller Soul Eater unfolded and shot up, already toothed, already hungry, already growing. Fire had made it, ice only planted it. Lastanel wove through the air in tight, wrenching turns, slipping the thorn spears that came up at them like thrown lances, and Maya finally understood what she was fighting. The thing was not drawing its strength from the sun or from prey. It was pulling energy straight up out of the earth, out of the whole poisoned field, and as long as there was ground under it, there was no cutting it down. Kill the flower and the roots grew another. Kill the roots and the soil grew more roots. There was one thing that would end it. She knew it the moment Cain said it. "Lastanel's breath," he called over the wind. The poison, use it. She hesitated. He felt her hesitate. She had said once that she did not care about flowers. It was not true anymore, and that was the trouble. The dragon's poison breath did not just kill what stood in front of it, it killed the ground. It left a place dead for decades. No flower, no grass, no green thing, not in her lifetime, and maybe not in Kane's. She would save every soul in Windsound and hand him a graveyard where his parents' field had been. Maya. Kane's gauntlet closed over her shoulder, gold light bleeding through the plate. He said it steadily, the way you say a thing you have already decided to carry. When the seasons have turned, the flowers will bloom again, many times over. Even if it takes decades, I'll bring this field back to life, and I'll weave you a flower crown again, a breath. The people of the border are my family. Lend me your strength to protect them. It was his mother's line, the passphrase from her old barrier, the promise of a thing that comes back around. Maya closed her eyes for 1 second and opened them and let the field go. Soul Eater, she said quietly, to the thing that could not hear her. May you be born next time as something with a soul of its own. Then she called the liches down onto the dragon's neck one last time. They set their hands flat against the black scales and laced fire through what was rising in Lastinel's throat. Poison under flame, the worst thing the dragon carried made worse. Below, the great Soul Eater gathered every thorned tendril it owned into one enormous drill, a spear of teeth and vine as wide as a house, and drove it up at them through the smoke. Maya loosed the dark breath to meet it. What came out of the dragon was not red, and was not any color at all, a torrent of black flame. So black it seemed to take the light out of the air it crossed, pouring down over the field in a single unbroken column. It swallowed the great drill whole. It swallowed the smaller ones sprouting behind it. It ran out across the whole meadow and drank the fire that was already there, drank the smoke, drank the thorns, and the moss, and the roots reaching down into the poisoned earth. And it did not stop at the surface. It went into the ground. It burned the Soul Eaters out of the world so completely that not one seed was left to catch. Soul and body and root and all gone, the way the deer had gone, except that this time it was mercy. The roaring stopped, all of it at once. When the black flame guttered out, there was nothing moving on the plain. The Soul Eaters were ash. Windsound stood safe behind its walls, every soul in it whole, not one of them ever knowing how close the teeth had come, and the field was dead. It stretched away under the sinking moon, black and cracked and silent, the pale blue flowers gone as if they had never grown. The ground itself scorched down past anything that could hold a root. Nothing would come up here for a long time. Kane looked at it over her shoulder and did not say anything for a while, and she let him not say it. It'll come back, he said at last. Not a question, a vow, spoken to a dead field as if it could hear him the way the Soul Eater couldn't. When the seasons have turned, however many of them it takes. Maya looked out at the ruin she had made to save the living and found she believed him, which surprised her a little. She had chosen this, the town over the ground, a finite life over a deathless one, judgment over slaughter, all of it in one night. The traitor was crawling somewhere in the dark with nothing left to crawl toward. The dragon was hers. The man at her back had come into his family's power at last. The people were safe. Only one debt was still open. Somewhere behind her, in a land that could no longer feed itself, a saint who had thrown Maya to the executioners was running out of places to stand. No crown to shelter her now, no faction, no miracle she could work in a country the dead had won and the poison had killed. The reckoning for that one had not come yet, but it was coming. Maya had waited 11 years already. A little longer was nothing at all. The field was black all the way to the tree line, and Maya could not stop looking at it. From the dragon's back, the ruin was worse than it had been from the ground. A day ago, the soul flowers had glowed a soft blue across the whole plain. Now, there was cracked earth and a few threads of black flame that refused to die, and the wind carried nothing but ash. She had done that. She had chosen it to save the town behind the walls, and she would choose it again, and it still sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. I couldn't protect anything, she said quietly. Not the flower field my husband loved, not what was left of his parents in it. Kane's arms tightened at her back. He had ridden behind her the whole way, gold light still ghosting faintly through the seams of his plate. That isn't true. He told her the people of the border were breathing because of her, and that the ground was only ground. Fields could be brought back, he said, as long as there were people left alive to bring them back. Give it seasons, and the flowers would come again. She heard his mother's promise under the words, and she let it steady her. Then, somewhere behind the grief, an idea moved, cold, clean, and certain, and it curved her mouth into something that was not quite a smile. There was a way to heal the dead ground fast. It would cost exactly one person something, and that one person owed her a debt 11 years overdue. Maya turned the dragon's head toward the lights of Windsound. The dragon came down over Windsound, and the whole town poured out to meet it. They were not afraid. That still caught her off guard every time. A black dragon with 2 dull red coals for eyes settled its bulk across the chapel square, and the people of the frontier ran toward it with their lanterns high. "Lady Maya," a man bellowed, and the shout caught and spread. "The dragon's dead, and she's riding it home. She saved us. The monster's gone. She killed the thing in the field." She let them cheer. Somewhere in the middle of it, the chapel door banged open, and the saint stumbled out into the torchlight, hair fallen loose, robes crushed from sleep. Kiara Briscoe had slept through the roaring, slept through the fire, and now she came out sour and squinting to complain about the noise. She wanted to know who had dared wake her. Her beauty needed its rest, she informed the square, and whoever had disturbed it would answer for it through Prince Gilbert himself. Then the dragon turned its head and fixed its cold red eyes on her, and every word died in her throat. Maya lifted one hand. The great tail swept in and closed around the saint before she could scream, and the dragon rose off the cobblestones into the dark with Kiara held fast in its grip. Below, Kane stood in the churning lantern light with his axe on his shoulder, watching them climb. "Don't stay out too long," he called up. "Send riders to the miasma cave," she called back. "Rachel and Craig are still there. Bring them home." Then Windsound was a scatter of yellow lights beneath her, and the night swallowed it. Kiara spent the first minutes of the flight shrieking that she was going to fall. Maya watched the ruined land slide past below and answered without much interest. If the saint fell and died, she would simply take responsibility and raise her again as undead. It did nothing at all to calm her. The wailing only got louder, which Maya found she could live with. When the terror wore itself down to sulking, the saint changed her tune. She started to boast. Once she was queen, she said, she would have a whole court of handsome men around her and every comfort she was owed, and she would make certain the people who had wronged her suffered for it. "I'll back you to the throne," Maya said. "I'll build your legend for you myself." That stunned the saint silent. She wanted to know why the villainess who had spent the whole story opposing her would ever lift a finger to help her win. It made no sense inside the game. She still thought she was living. So Maya told her the truth, flat and low over the wind. This was not a game. It never had been. She was a soul reborn out of another world, living her own life here as herself. And after a long, wary pause, the saint admitted in a small voice that she was one too, reborn from the very same world. "Then hear me clearly." Maya's voice went cold. "Betray that secret to anyone, and I'll turn you undead while you're still breathing. Do you understand?" The saint understood. The deal was simple. Below them lay a stretch of poisoned ground 1.5 miles across. Black bubbles breaking and reeking. Black flame licking through a dead swamp. "Purify it," Maya told her, "and walk away the hero who cleansed the border. Refuse, and stay here in the waste." Kiara pulled herself together, raised her hands, and cast the strongest purification she had, a spell the old saints once used to draw poison out of a king in a heartbeat. A thin ripple of white light drifted down and touched perhaps a handspan of the corruption before it guttered out. She swore, panting, that this was everything she had, every drop of mana in her. Maya looked at the vast dead swamp, then at the pitiful little glow already fading, and did not bother to hide her disgust. "Born with a saint's gift," she said, "and never once trained it in a whole second life. Small wonder it was this feeble." She brought the dragon low, and its long tail coiled once around the saint and drew tight. Maya laid her hand against the dragon's scaled hide and opened the channel. She could pass her mana through touch and route it through her own dead as easily as through her own arm, so she did not touch the saint at all. She poured her power into the dragon, and the dragon poured it down the length of its tail into the woman coiled at the end of it, a flood, endless and dark. More mana in one breath than Kiara had held in her whole shallow life. "Do the work," Maya told her, "or I leave you out here in the waste. Your choice." The saint cast, and this time the spell did not gutter. Antidote roared out of her hands the way it was always meant to, and behind it, a second working Fairy Purify spilled across the swamp in a widening ring of white light. Where it passed, the black bubbles stilled. The dead flame went out. The reeking crust of corruption lifted off the ground like a scab and burned away to nothing in the clean glow. Somewhere in the middle of it, the borrowed power went to the saint's head. Maya heard her start to crow, that this, at last, this was her true strength. This was the might a real saint was born to wield. "It's my magic, not your power," Maya said, without heat. "Get too proud of yourself and I'll leave you out in the waste to think it over." The crowing stopped. The working was too much for her to carry gracefully. Twice the saint sagged and the light stuttered, and each time one of Maya's mages, Nathaniel, drew a quiet veil of illusion across the ugliest of it so the spell could hold its shape. And it held. All through the last of the dark it held, the ring of purification crawling outward mile by mile, until the swamp was gone and only bare damp earth remained. Then the sun came up over the frontier, and the dead land answered it. Green threaded up through the wet black soil, first a haze of it, then a flush, then whole sheets of new grass unrolling across ground that a day before had been ash. Tiny shoots of the old soul flowers pushed up blue among them, thin as thread, but alive. The plane that Maya had killed to save the town was breathing again by dawn, and the woman who had thrown Maya to her death was the one on her knees making it happen, wrung out, and swaying at the end of a dead dragon's tail. Maya watched the light come up green across all of it, and something in her chest that had been clenched for 11 years, finally, slowly let go. The dragon sat down in the castle garden with the sun full up, and the whole border was waiting. They filled the lawns and the walls and every window. Soldiers who had held the line, townsfolk who had cowered behind it, servants, farmers, children hauled up onto shoulders. When Maya swung down off the dragon, they roared for her, one long wall of sound, and she stood in the middle of it, not quite knowing what to do with her hands. There she is. There's Our Lady. The borders saved and the fields green again by morning. She did it in a single night. The dragon uncurled its tail and dumped the saint out onto the grass and let her lie there. Kiara was a spent, gray heap of rumpled white and gold, too drained to stand, too drained even to be shrill. The celebrated saint who had come to this frontier to purge the villainess, kneeling in the villainess's garden because the villainess had told her to. Nobody in the crowd cheered for her. A few of them peered down at her, worked out who she was, and laughed. That was the whole of the reckoning, and it was enough. No headsman, no fire, no speech. Only the plain fact of it, in front of everyone. The woman who had framed her, denounced her, and handed her to the executioners now lay used up at Maya's feet, having spent the last of herself healing the very land Maya loved, because Maya had willed it, and there had been nothing in the world she could do but obey. Word had come up from the capital too, carried quietly the way Eloise carried things, that the prince's court no longer answered only to the prince. The people who had thrown Maya away had, every one of them, come around to serving her purpose in the end. She had waited a long time to owe them nothing. Now, she owed them nothing at all. A path opened in the crowd, and two familiar figures came through it. Craig, breastplate still buckled over his black uniform, the dust of the cave on him, and beside him, Rachel, whole again, mended clean, walking as though she had never been struck down at all. Rachel took one look at the swordmaster's grim face and grinned. "You'll have to answer for it now, Craig," she said, bumping his shoulder with hers. "You owe me, after all that." Color climbed up the old man's neck. "I was careless. I'll make it right, my lady, however long it takes." "Then live," Maya cut in. "That's the whole debt. Stay alive and answer for it that way." Craig shut his mouth. Rachel's grin softened into something quieter and more pleased, and she did not stop watching him. Kane shouldered his way out of the crowd last of all, and stopped in front of her, and for a moment just looked at her like a man making sure she was real. She got there first, dry as ever. "You held the whole town together with an axe on your shoulder. I leave for one night, and you become respectable. Thank you, Maya." He ducked his head, ears going pink. "And welcome back." That was the one that got through the armor. She had heard cheering all morning, a whole frontier calling her its hero, and it was these two small words from him that finally set the last of the weight down. She was tired. Not the tiredness of a hard day, the deep kind. The kind she had been carrying since a square in the capital 11 years ago. The kind she had never once been safe enough to put down. She drew him back into the shade of the young tree, out of sight of the crowd, and leaned into his chest and closed her eyes. "Just rest here a while," she murmured. "You smell like home." She felt him go very still and very careful, the way you go still when something precious falls asleep on you. "I'll hold still," he said softly. "Rest as long as you need." And she did. The villainess they had executed for necromancy had made the hated power a throne. The saint who threw her away had greened her dead fields by dawn and would answer to her for the rest of a long life. The frontier that once feared the dead now called her home, and the cursed lord the world called a monster held her while she slept. Maya slept the whole day through, the first deep, dreamless, unguarded sleep she had known in either of her lives. She had waited 11 years to be allowed to rest. She was done waiting.